Chapter 206. Resentment soared into the sky, and the devil disappeared. What the innate God cultivated was indeed a cultivation technique of the Tao fruit Great Tao. However, the root of this cultivation technique had been changed. Although he could seek to verify the boundlessly mysterious and powerful Tao fruit, he was still unable to do so. However, it was more of a trick, and it did not directly lead to transcendence. The more one cultivated such a cultivation technique, the stronger one's power would be, and the higher one's cultivation realm would be. However, the essence of one's life would become more turbid, and the further one would be from the chance of transcendence. The Tao fruit obtained from this cultivation technique was the Earth Demon Tao fruit. Although it was only one word different from the Earth Immortal Tao fruit, there was a world of difference. The Earth Immortal Tao fruit contained the origin of life, and it resonated with the soul. It contained all kinds of mysterious and indescribable mysteries. However, the Earth Demon Tao fruit was different. It completely incorporated the soul of the cultivator, allowing these two extremely mysterious existences to completely fuse together. After obtaining the Earth Demon Tao fruit, the soul would be the Tao fruit, and the Tao fruit would be the soul. In this way, it was equivalent to abandoning the physical body and turning it into a magic power. It could be said that although this technique was quite mysterious, it had lost the essence of the Tao fruit. Even compared to Fun Tian's primordial spirit Great Tao before it was modified by Luofan, it was still inferior. The door in front of him was formed from the Earth Demon Tao fruit obtained by this cultivation technique. The power contained within was extremely huge, and it was completely transformed from the physical body of the innate God. After transforming into this door, the spiritual consciousness of the innate God had been completely wiped out. At this moment, the door looked extremely mysterious, but it was just a dead object. This cultivation technique evolved from my Tao fruit Great Tao, and it also contains such a hidden fatal weakness. The person who evolved this cultivation technique must be the Great Freedom Demon Master. Luofan deduced from the result, and a cultivation technique formed by countless words and patterns appeared in his mind. He instantly guessed the origin of this cultivation technique. At this moment, he had already thought it through. In this primordial world, other than him, the only people who understood his Tao fruit Great Tao cultivation technique were his disciples, sons, and grandchildren. However, outside the primordial world, there was another person who understood his Tao fruit Great Tao cultivation technique. It was the vast Freedom Sky Demon Master who had appeared once when he was undergoing the heavenly tribulation. When the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord was creating the tribulations for Luofan, he had peeped into Luofan's memories, so it was not strange that he knew about his cultivation technique. Understanding this, Luofan felt relieved in his heart. The unknown was the scariest. Previously, Luofan did not know the cause of the great trial, nor did he know why the Great Freedom Demonic Lord did not seize the opportunity to enter the untainted land when Guangpu was going through the trial. Now that he understood the method the Great Freedom Demonic Lord used to enter the untainted land, even though the situation was still bad and there were still some unsolved questions, he felt much more at ease. The world that the door led to was the Freedom Incarnation outside the realm, and it was a one-way passage. One could only enter the untainted world from the Freedom Incarnation, but not from the untainted world to the Freedom Incarnation. On the other hand, the strange screams that faintly sounded out from the door were coming from the Mahasvara demon within the Mahasvara, and it was strange, mysterious, and unfathomable to the extreme. Luofan sighed. He raised his hand, and an invisible force acted on the door. He exerted a little force, and was about to crush the door into pieces, so that it would turn back into various kinds of energy and disperse into the water of the underworld. However, just as he was about to make his move, he suddenly thought of something. It is very likely that the great trial this time came from the Great Freedom Demonic Lord. If I can understand the freedom incarnation, it will definitely be easier for me to pass through the trial. With the existence of this one-way door, I should be able to research the way to the freedom incarnation. If I destroy it just like that, it will be too much of a waste, he thought. As he thought of this, his hand changed, and countless strange energy threads condensed from the spirit space inside the Wuji Palace by Luo Fan. Like countless living creatures, they stuck to the huge door and swam quickly on its surface. After a short while, it had already condensed into a silk cocoon, tightly wrapping around the huge door, forming a huge and mysterious seal. As the seal was formed, the mysterious aura that the door gave off instantly disappeared. It was completely isolated by the seal, and it could no longer be sensed by the outside world. However, after the aura was concealed, a towering resentment rushed out of the door. It passed through the obstruction of the seal and pressed down on the surroundings. It caused the yellow springs within a radius of 1,000 miles to become violent, like a pot of boiling soup. Why? Why did you do this to me? I was loyal to my mother. Why did you abandon me? Why? Why? The soundless howls that could make even a stone-hearted person feel pity entered Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. He knew that this was the resentment left behind by the innate God, and he could not help but feel pity for the innate God. At this moment, he had a general understanding of what had happened to the innate God, but all he could do was sigh. He raised his hand and waved. As the magic power in his body flowed, a mysterious aura filled with endless calming energy was born from the void and instantly washed the door 108,000 times. Although the innate God's resentment was deep, he was dead after all. For Luo Fan, it was quite easy to dispel his resentment. With these 108,000 washes, the resentment completely dissipated, and the seal returned to its normal state. He raised his hand and waved. The seal shrank rapidly and quickly floated towards Luo Fan. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into a fist-sized small door lying in his hand. Holding the small door, Luo Fan carefully observed it and found that the seal was very tight and strong. Even if the innate God was resurrected, he would not be able to break it. The expression on his face didn't change, and there was a bit of relaxation in his eyes. He casually threw the small portal into the mini kiliacosm inside the Wuji Palace, and then suddenly sank, sealing it in the center of the mini kiliacosm's sun. It was placed together with the countless extraterrestrial demons that had turned into statues. Then, its power was constantly extracted and transformed into the true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun, which shone on the whole central continent and gave it endless vitality. At this point, Luo Fan was completely relieved. After all, this door was formed by an innate God who had attained the fruit of Tao. Although the fruit of Tao was very fake, it was still a fruit of Tao. Moreover, it led to the Mahasvara demon lord's Mahasvara heaven. Even if it was sealed, Luo Fan could not be completely at ease. He was worried whether the extraterrestrial demons would break the seal. But now it was different. The true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun were existences of extreme yang, and they were innately aware of all evil demons. Even if a Mahasvara demon could break his seal and enter the small kiliacosm through the door, he would still be wrapped by the true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun naturally. He would not be able to wreak havoc under the extreme yang power. Therefore, he did not have to worry anymore. As Luo Fan's eyes turned, his mind had already illuminated the area within a radius of 100,000 miles, carefully searching for all the auras within this area. However, the result was obvious. He did not find any auras other than the innate God. It was as if no other living beings had stepped into this area at all. As expected, the Mahasvara demon lord's cultivation realm improved faster than I expected. Luo Fan sighed. He naturally knew that the absence of auras did not mean that nothing came out of the door. It only meant that the existence that came out of the door had mastered the aura to the point of perfection, and had even reached the point where there was no trace of the aura dissipating. And this existence was most likely the Mahasvara demon lord, although he knew that it would be difficult to find anything even if he continued to search. Luo Fan still did not want to give up. He raised his hand and pointed between his eyebrows. The Wuji Void Palace turned into a khaki light and rushed out from between his eyebrows. It wrapped around his body. As the khaki light wrapped around his body, Luo Fan instantly felt that the range of his perception had expanded by many times. The Yellow Spring Valley, which was 6 million miles long and 100,000 miles wide, appeared in his mind. It was so detailed that almost no details were missed. However, there was also no gain. Since he had already used his ultimate move, Luo Fan would not give up just like that. With a slight change of his mind, the khaki light formed by the Wuji Void Palace turned and rushed down the Yellow Spring Valley with his body. The speed was so fast that it was almost as if it was teleporting. After a few breaths, he was already covered by the Wuji Void Palace and had crossed a distance of thousands of miles. Outside the distance of thousands of miles, the Yellow Spring Valley instantly changed. The invisible talisman ghosts that he had not seen for a long time gradually increased, and among them, the visible talisman ghosts appeared again. Luo Fan's thoughts changed. He already knew that it was because they were out of the range of influence of the innate deity, so he wasn't surprised. He just carefully sorted out any unusual aura that might exist in the Yellow Spring. Unfortunately, there was no surprise. After flying for more than 3 billion miles, Luo Fan finally confirmed that the Mahasvara demon lord was no longer in the Yellow Spring. He was a little disappointed but also a little surprised. With a change of his mind, the khaki light formed by the Wuji Void Palace suddenly changed direction and rushed up with his body. After a short while, it rushed out of the ground and came to the surface. This place was already more than 4 billion miles away from Buzhou Mountain. At this place, Buzhou Mountain had already become an imperceptible blurry dot, even with the golden eyes of the great sun and bright moon's silver eyes. However, the surrounding environment did not seem to have changed much from the surroundings of Buzhou Mountain. The terrain was undulating, chaotic qi was everywhere, and the density of the innate vitality was not reduced at all. After looking around, Luo Fan took a step and came to the front of a cave halfway up a nearby mountain. This cave was filled with wisps of chaotic qi, and there was some kind of obscure and unfathomable life force in it. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that even if there was no innate deity in this cave, there must be some kind of living creature. This distance of more than 3 billion miles took Luo Fan a total of 10 days. At this time, he was already a little annoyed. Suddenly seeing a chance of survival in front of him, he would not let it go. Standing in front of the cave, he released his power, and there was an imposing manner that soared into the sky, almost covering the sky and the earth, rushing into the depths of the cave. After a long time, there was not much change in the life force, and no living creature came to cause trouble for Luo Fan. Luo Fan knew that the living creature must be in existence with incomplete spiritual consciousness, and he sighed in his heart. Withdrawing his own imposing manner, he took a step and stepped into the cave. This cave first went up for thousands of feet, then turned straight down, and only after going down for hundreds of thousands of feet was the bottom of the cave. Chapter 207. Golden and White Apes. Rebirth from a drop of blood. This was a gray ape that was hundreds of feet tall. It lay quietly on the ground, its abdomen rising and falling, and a huge turbid airflow was constantly expanding and contracting from its mouth and nose. Its loud snoring was like thunder, and the whole cave seemed to shake slightly with its breathing. Luo Fan's body was only the size of a normal person, and under the reflection of this ape, he was like an ant. But compared with the vigorous power of his body, this ape was like an ant. As soon as Luo Fan saw this gray ape, he knew that it was a post-celestial being, born from the intercourse of two innate gods. It contained two kinds of power sources, which seemed a little mixed and impure, but there was a certain mystery in it. Master, this big guy is so interesting. Why don't you fuse him with me? That way I can save many years of refining." At this time, the voice of Xuanji Boy appeared in Luo Fan's mind again. Luo Fan knew that Xuanji Boy was a protective magic treasure, and it had the ability to absorb all things to strengthen itself. The ape below was born from the intercourse of two innate gods. Although its nature was inferior to that of innate gods, its physical body was strong and tough, and ordinary innate gods could not compare with it. If it was fused into the Xuanji robe, it could greatly strengthen the Xuanji robe, and it could improve the Xuanji robe. However, Luo Fan would not make such a choice. Although he did not have much psychological barriers to fusing living creatures into the magic treasure to strengthen its power, this did not mean that he would be crazy enough to fuse all the living creatures he could find into the magic treasure. Besides, since this post-celestial ape was born from the intercourse of two innate gods, there were naturally two innate gods nearby. Although he was confident, he did not rule out that there were innate gods in the untainted land who could defeat him. Under such circumstances, he directly treated the Xuanji Boy's words as complaints and directly ignored them. As soon as he landed, he was already above the head, hovering about 30 feet above its nostrils. He looked down at the head, which was more than 100 feet in size. Accompanied by the loud snoring, he did not feel the pressure of facing a gigantic creature. Instead, he felt a sense of charmingly naive and charmingly naive. Suddenly, the ape seemed to feel something. The muscles and hair on its face twitched a few times, smacked its lips, and suddenly raised a big hand. In the blink of an eye, it had already arrived behind Luo Fan, sweeping at Luo Fan a few times as if it was driving away mosquitoes. How fast was Luo Fan's reaction? Naturally, he would not be affected by this unintentional sweep. With a few flashes of his body, he had already dodged the sweep of this large hand. In a few flashes, he had already dodged the sweep of the big hand. The big hand waved a few times and seemed to find that there was nothing there. It pressed down and scratched its childish and naive ape face. In an instant, the naivety became even stronger, making Luo Fan feel warm. After a while, seeing that the ape had fallen unconscious again, Luo Fan's eyes narrowed. Through the great sun-golden eyes and the bright moon-silver eyes, he had already seen the situation below the ape in the blink of an eye. On the back of the azure ape's spine, right behind the dantian, there was a small source of chaotic energy. It was only 30 feet in diameter, but it was exceptionally condensed. It looked as black as ink, and contained an extremely large amount of chaotic energy. Moreover, what surprised Luo Fan even more was that this source of chaotic vitality had obviously been processed by living creatures. On the surface of this source of chaotic vitality, there were 1,296 patterns. These patterns were alternating between blue and yellow, exuding a sense of water and earth, containing a strong sealing power. Luo Fan looked carefully and knew that these patterns were laid down by two innate gods. The blue pattern was condensed by the chaotic water essence, and the yellow pattern was condensed by the chaotic earth essence. Combined with the power in the gray ape, Luo Fan knew that this should be a means set up by the ape's parents. It seems that the two innate gods should be rushing here now. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and he looked around. This made him see some things that he had overlooked before. On the wall of the deep cave there seemed to be no pattern, but in fact quite mysterious carvings. These carvings were shallow and deep, and the power was condensed without dispersing. It was carved by a living creature that had already achieved Tao. Although its power was not strong, it was quite mysterious, as if it had the ability to sense every living creature that stepped into this cave, every force, and could transmit this information to a faraway place through some mysterious method. Luo Fan noticed these carvings, and after a brief analysis, he knew that this was the defense method of the ape's parents. Thinking about it, it was the truth. Since their descendants were here, How could they open the cave so casually for people to come and go? It could even be said that the reason why Luo Fan could come here without a sound was because his cultivation realm was much higher than the two innate gods, and he did not activate the defense method that they had left behind. As expected, just as Luo Fan realized this, there was a deep and anxious voice that blasted from outside the cave, rolling down like thunder in Luo Fan's ears. It even made Luo Fan feel that his eardrums were ringing, and there was a stabbing pain. "Which master is playing in my son's residence? Please come out and meet me." The voice was deep and the language used was very strange, and it was not any language that Luo Fan knew. However, the thoughts contained within were clear and unmistakable. Even an ordinary person would be able to understand its meaning, let alone someone with an extremely high cultivation like Luo Fan. "Playing? That's a good word." Luo Fan laughed in his heart. But he did not go too far and said, "My friend, please forgive me, I sense the existence of living creatures here, and I came to see you, but I did not expect you to be my friend's son, please forgive me." As he spoke, he had already used his perception to bring the innate god into his mind. It was a 10,000 feet tall golden-haired ape with a ferocious face, and the hair on his body was golden under the sunlight. The aura on his body was strong and condensed, and there was an indescribable aura coming from his body. Just by looking at this aura, it was not inferior to Hongjun. Boom, 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 boom. Suddenly, there was a loud roar from afar, and the ground shook slightly. Luo Fan's mind moved. He didn't need to rely on the perception enhancement of the limitless Void Palace. A white ape emerged in his mind's thoughts. It was rushing towards this location at a high speed. Its body, demeanor, and lines were soft, and a feminine beauty gushed out. Obviously, it was a female ape. However, the white ape's strength was a notch weaker than the golden ape. If there was a distinction, the golden ape was like a cultivator who had achieved fruit of Tao, and the white ape was like a crossing disaster realm. Although there was not much difference between the two, there was an essential difference. At least, the golden ape could travel with the wind, and it could approach the 10,000 feet tall mountain without a sound, while the white ape could only run on the ground. Luo Fan took a step forward, and in an instant, he crossed hundreds of thousands of feet, and appeared in front of the cave. The giant ape that was 10,000 feet tall seemed to be a small scale, but if one were to see it face to face, it would be extremely shocking. "Oh, I see." The golden ape was rather simple, and after listening to Luo Fan's explanation, it did not suspect anything, and it laughed. This was the normal behavior of the innate gods. After all, compared to the huge scale of the untainted world, the number of innate gods could be said to be very small, and the interaction between the various innate gods was naturally also very small. As a result, most of the innate gods could only explore alone from birth to Tao, and it was difficult for them to find innate gods to communicate with. Without any interaction with other innate gods, they naturally appeared simple and simple. "My child, how is my child, what happened?" The white ape had also arrived at this moment, and it asked the golden ape anxiously. The indescribable motherly nature was revealed in a straightforward manner. "I'm sorry, I was reckless and caused you two to misunderstand," Luo Fan hurriedly said. "Haha. It's okay, it's okay. This expert must be anxious to see living beings. If it were us, we would also do the same," the golden ape said, patting the white ape's back. "Fortunately, my child is fine." At this moment, the white ape also sensed the situation of its child, and it was only then that it was relieved. Luo Fan repeatedly expressed his embarrassment. The golden ape and the white ape expressed that there was no need to worry, and they were even extremely happy because of Luo Fan's arrival. After all, Luo Fan was the only innate god they had met since they were born, and he was on par with them. As for the size of Luo Fan's body, it was not a problem for the innate gods. During this exchange, Luo Fan also learned the names of the two apes. The golden ape was called Yuan Tong. The white ape was called Yuan Qi. The two were born in the same chaotic vitality source, and they were naturally attracted to each other. Finally, after they were born, they naturally became husband and wife, and finally gave birth to the acquired azure ape in the depths of the cave tens of thousands of years ago. The method that Yuan Qi and Yuan Tong cultivated was also quite strange, but it was the pattern Tao. Moreover, the direction of cultivation was to strengthen one's body, so that the more one cultivated, the bigger and more tenacious the body would be, and the more power it would contain. Looking at Yuan Tong's current strength, his body had already undergone some kind of essential change. Every cell of his body had turned into a strange pattern, piled up together, and could disperse and gather. There were also incredible almighty abilities such as blood rebirth, flying in the sky, burrowing into the ground, and moving mountains and seas. The blood rebirth could allow him to become a complete Yuan Tong again, no matter what kind of injury he suffered, as long as there was a drop of blood, and a little bit of skin and hair, it was equivalent to an immortal body. Chapter 208. The Great Tao of Patterns and the Exchange of Methods, Rebirth from a Single Drop of Blood? Cultivating the Great Tao of Patterns to the realm of Tao validation has such a miraculous ability. Luo Fan was shocked to hear that Yuan Tong could be reborn from a single drop of blood. Rebirth from a single drop of blood was a heaven-defying ability. Even if Luo Fan had attained the Earth Immortal Tao fruit, he would only have two sources of life, the spirit and the Tao fruit. If both were destroyed, then he would die no matter how powerful he was. Compared to the great Tao of Pattern's ability to be reborn from a single drop of blood, he was much weaker in terms of survivability. Haha! I didn't quite believe it when I first cultivated the body of immortality. Please take a look, fellow Taoists. Yuan Tong laughed when he saw Luo Fan's surprise. With that, he shook his hand, and his right pinky finger broke off from the root with a crack. It left his palm in the blink of an eye and fell straight down. Yuan Tong's body was tens of thousands of meters tall. Even though he was sitting down, his finger was still several thousand meters above the ground. The falling of a severed finger was like a giant pillar falling from the sky, possessing an indescribable power. Countless patterns seemed to flash on the pinky finger as it fell. Amidst the flashes of light, the cells on the pinky finger moved and reorganized in a frenzy, gradually changing shape. When it finally landed on the ground, it had turned into a golden ape that was 60 meters tall. It was a shrunken version of Yuan Tong. This shrunken version of Yuan Tong smiled at Luo Fan in front of him. Greetings, fellow Taoists. Luo Fan knew the duo's name from their previous exchange, and they naturally knew Luo Fan's name as well. However, they no longer referred to Luo Fan as a mighty expert. Luo Fan and Yuan Tong were very different in size, but Luo Fan didn't use any techniques to make himself bigger. He didn't sit at the same height as Yuan Tong and Yuan Tong's heads, either. He simply sat on a rock on the ground like them. The difference in size between the two sides was huge, but there was nothing unnatural about it. Luo Fan didn't seem small, and Yuan Tong and the other two didn't seem tall either. At this time, when Luo Fan saw the golden ape greeting him, he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. It was indeed rebirth from a single drop of blood. He didn't want to be rude, so he bowed to return the greeting before saying, "Fellow Taoist, you're an almighty being, it's truly incredible." Yuan Tong chuckled and waved his hand. The 20-meter-tall golden ape leaped into the air, arriving at where Yuan Tong's hand was in the blink of an eye. It suddenly turned around and transformed back into a fluffy golden finger that returned to Yuan Tong's hand. If fellow Taoist wishes to obtain this technique, I am willing to teach it to you. I just need you to agree to one of my requests. Yuan Tong chuckled. When Yuan Tong was testing out the technique, Luo Fan had already seen through some of its mysteries. However, this technique had already pushed the great Tao of Pattern Tao to its limit. Even with his golden eyes of the sun and silver eyes, it was difficult for Luo Fan to see through the intricacies of the technique in such a short amount of time. Although he would definitely be able to obtain this technique if he studied it properly in the future, it would still take a lot of time. As such, after seeing the technique, Luo Fan had been thinking about how to ask Yuan Tong and Yuan Tong for this technique. Hearing Yuan Tong's words, he was secretly delighted. To tell you the truth, fellow Taoist, I am indeed quite interested in your great Tao of Pattern Tao. Do you have any requests? Feel free to speak your mind. Yuan Tong exchanged a look with Yuan Qi, who had been standing quietly to the side. Both of them revealed expressions of joy and apprehension. Fellow Taoist has seen my son before. He is a postnatal lifeform, and his talent is far inferior to us connate lifeforms. However, the great Tao of Pattern Tao has extremely high requirements for talent. If my son cultivates the great Tao of Pattern Tao, it will be extremely difficult for him to achieve anything in the future. I see that your cultivation technique is different from the great Tao of Pattern Tao, but it also contains endless mysteries. I wonder if there is a way for my son to return to connate lifeforms? If there is, I am willing to trade the great Tao of Pattern Tao for it. Yuan Tong said sincerely. I see. How pitiful of parents. Luo Fan finally understood what Yuan Tong and his wife wanted and sighed inside. However, he had to admire Yuan Tong's foresight. From the moment they met, Luo Fan had only used a bit of his ability to get from the bottom of the cave to the entrance. Who would have thought that such a small movement would allow Yuan Tong to see through the mysteries of his cultivation technique? Fellow Taoist's love for his son is truly admirable. It can be considered a coincidence. It would be difficult for you to ask anyone else, but you've asked the right person. Because I have a son and a grandson who are also postnatal lifeforms, I've spent a lot of effort to deduce a few methods for postnatal lifeforms to return to connate lifeforms. I should have given them to you for free, but I really yearn for your great Tao of Pattern Tao, so I'm shamelessly exchanging them with you. Luo Fan smiled. Ah, fellow Taoist really has such a method? The ape mantis eyes were filled with incomparable surprise. She rushed forward and opened her big hands to pounce on Luo Fan. Her movements were so huge that it caused a violent vibration, as if the earth was quaking and the mountains were shaking. Hey, calm down. Yuan Tong was calmer. Although he was overjoyed, he still retained his rationality. He quickly pulled Yuan Tong back and stopped her from expressing her joy in such an inappropriate manner. Yuan Tong only came back to her senses after being pulled back by Yuan Tong. She quickly retracted her arms and said with some embarrassment, "My apologies, I was too excited. Please forgive me, fellow Taoists. Don't worry about it. I was once a father, so I can completely understand your love for your child." Luo Fan didn't care. His cultivation level was much higher than Yuan Tong's, and Yuan Tong's actions posed no threat to him, so why would he care? Yuan Tong couldn't stand it any longer. He grabbed at the air, and 1,000-meter-wide, steel-like rock shot into the sky from a few 100,000 meters away. It landed in his hand in the blink of an eye. He rubbed his hands together, and the steel-like rock changed shape like tofu. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a stone slab that was 3,000 meters long and 30 meters thick. Then, he raised his hand and swiped it across the stone slab. Countless patterns appeared on the stone slab, flashing and changing constantly. In the blink of an eye, it had formed an extremely strange pattern that seemed to contain endless mysteries. It also looked like a scribble. Seeing that the pattern had taken shape, Yuan Tong gently sent the slate over to Luo Fan. "It's really big." Luo Fan's eyes couldn't help but twitch. What did a stone slab that was 3,000 meters long and 30 meters thick look like? One had to know that he was less than 10 feet tall, and the 10 feet thick stone slab was equivalent to the height of a dozen of him stacked on top of each other. In addition, the stone slab was thousands of feet long. The stone slab placed in front of him was like a huge square. Thankfully, the stone slab was made from ordinary stone, so it wasn't difficult for Luo Fan to change its size. As such, he waved his hand, and an invisible force acted on the stone slab. This invisible force was extremely profound, and it seemed to contain some kind of inconceivable power. When it acted on the stone slab, it gradually changed in a strange way. The entire stone slab gradually shrank and compressed. After a short while, it had shrunk into a stone slab that was 3 feet long and as thin as paper. It still looked a little big, but it was a lot better than before. When Yuan Tong saw Luo Fan's actions, he realized that he had overlooked something. He couldn't help but embarrassedly scratch the back of his head and gave a simple and honest smile. Yuan Tong pinched Yuan Tong's waist in dissatisfaction. He clearly felt that Yuan Tong was being rude, and he was worried that it would make Luo Fan unhappy and affect his son's future. It's quite profound indeed. It's quite different from my pattern scrolls. Looks like it's better to specialize in one than to be all-rounder, Luo Fan sighed inwardly. The patterns on the stone slab were complicated and profound. If it was a regular person, they would only need to take a look to have their spiritual consciousness crushed by the mysteries within. However, to Luo Fan, it was more intuitive to record a cultivation method like this than using words, and the amount of information recorded was even greater. As a result, he only needed a glance to understand the mysteries of the patterns on the stone slab. He understood the origin of the great way of pattern. Turning the spirit into a pattern and fusing it with the body will change the nature of the body. In the end, the spirit will become the body, and the body will become the spirit. At that time, every drop of essence blood and every strand of hair will contain the essence of life. No wonder it can be reborn from a single drop of blood. Luo Fan was rather disappointed. The great way of pattern contained endless mysteries, and the ability to be reborn from a single drop of blood was almost nature-defying. However, it was in a completely different direction from the great way of fruit. To Luo Fan, he could only refer to the method of training the body. It was impossible for him to obtain the ability to be reborn from a single drop of blood with this cultivation method. After all, the great way of fruits was the fruit of cultivation and the spirit of cultivation. Although it did not give up on the tempering of the body, it was not the main focus. If the spirit and the body were completely fused, the spirit would be the body, and the body would be the spirit. This was completely the opposite of the cultivation method of the great way of fruit. It would only add countless obstacles to his path of cultivation. It would greatly weaken the power of his spells. It was not worth it to do this for the ability to be reborn from a single drop of blood. However, it's not like I didn't gain anything. Although I still don't know how to cultivate it, perhaps I can use another method to achieve rebirth from a single drop of blood. Luo Fan thought. He had completely calmed down when he thought of this. He looked up and said, "This method is extremely profound. You are truly a genius to be able to create this method." Haha, I was just lucky. Yuan Tong laughed. Chapter 209. Pattern returning to origin technique. These strange and mysterious patterns were what Luo Fan had created by borrowing the method that Yuan Tong had used just now. He had incorporated a technique that he had created at the last minute into the pattern. The cultivation technique that Luo Fan had created was the diagram reverting to origin technique, allowing the spirit to return to the connate state and raising its aptitude to the same level as the connate gods was just a concept. Although there were many mysteries contained within, and those who did not know would not be able to figure it out even if they racked their brains, one only needed to understand the key points to be able to incorporate it into any technique. When Luo Fan first created the primordial core soul sculpting technique, he had spent tens of thousands of years to clearly study the key points of the technique. Only then was he able to create a technique that almost went against the natural order. When he had created the 9 Heaven Sun transformation technique for Luo Chunyang in the future, he had only incorporated Luo Chunyang's body, aptitude, and essence into the key points that he had comprehended. He had even only needed a few thoughts to form that mysterious technique. Naturally, it was the same now. Although the pattern Great Tao and the fruit Great Tao were two completely different cultivation directions, their essence was the same. They both sought to verify the Great Tao that existed in the unseen world, so there were some similarities between them. The key points that allowed the spirit to return to the connate state could also be applied to the pattern Great Tao. Moreover, he had already used his gold and silver eyes to clearly see Yuan Tong's descendant, the water and earth gray ape. He had a complete grasp of his essence. Now that he combined the pattern Great Tao that Yuan Tong had cultivated with the two, he could easily incorporate the method of returning to the connate state. It was also completely compatible with the water and earth gray ape, allowing him to cultivate with twice the results with half the effort. If he cultivated this method, the water and earth gray ape would be able to improve at an extremely fast rate. In the end, after passing through several heavenly tribulations, he would naturally be able to cultivate an immortal body and become a supreme being that could be reborn from a single drop of blood. He would be able to directly wrap the pattern Great Tao within it. After memorizing the cultivation method on the stone slab, he raised his hand and gently pushed it. The stone slab floated up and expanded continuously during the process. In the blink of an eye, it had expanded to its original length of 10,000 feet. It was a huge stone slab that was as large as a public square. Although Yuan Tong was surprised that Luo Fan had managed to learn the method he had used to record his cultivation method on a single look, he didn't ask about it because he was concerned about the cultivation method that could allow his son to revert to his past self. He only hurriedly took the stone slab and carefully examined it. On the side, Yuan Mang was naive and did not understand the ways of the world. In his anxiety, he no longer hesitated and leaned over to examine the stone tablet with Yuan Tong. They carefully studied the cultivation method recorded on the stone tablet. Qi condensation, core formation, divine flame, return to the past, tribulation crossing, undying. Wonderful! 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 The ape comprehended the technique on the stone slab and muttered the word wonderful 3 times in a row. It was clear that he was extremely excited and could not control himself. This cultivation method was not just wonderful. It had simply expanded the scope of his great Tao of patterns by more than 100 times. Not only was it suitable for his son to cultivate, but even he could comprehend many wondrous techniques that he had never comprehended before. The great Tao of pattern that he cultivated was specialized and could cultivate his corporeal body to the limit. On the other hand, the great Tao of pattern that Luo Fan had created was extensive and could develop all the divine abilities that the great Tao of pattern could have. This cultivation method was like opening a door to an unknown world in front of Yuan Tong. It made him feel like his strength would increase at a fundamental level and that he would be able to use the divine arts of the undying body to the limit. In addition, the great Tao of patterns Yuan Tong cultivated had extremely high requirement. Without great comprehension, great control over the body, and great aptitude, it was impossible to cultivate. This could be seen from the fact that their son, who was born from 2 innate gods with great aptitude, could not meet the requirements of cultivation. But Luo Fan's diagram back to the past technique not only contained a wide range of divine arts, but it also lowered the requirements of aptitude to the minimum. As long as one had a spiritual consciousness and knew how to cultivate to the level of a living being, one could continuously improve their aptitude through this cultivation method. In the process, one's body would constantly grow until they finally reached the undying realm of this cultivation method. With the undying body, one would be able to be reborn from a single drop of blood, move mountains and seas, and travel through the sky and earth. They were almost omnipotent. Though Yuan Tong's cultivation level was lower, he could clearly see how profound the cultivation method Luo Fan had recorded was. He was extremely excited in the blink of an eye. Yuan Tong will never forget fellow Taoist's great kindness. Yuan Tong carefully stuffed the stone slab into his body and used the divine arts developed by the undying body to hide the stone slab. His voice was deep and resounding like thunder. At this moment, because of his excitement, it contained an even more overwhelming grandeur. Luo Fan waved his hand and said, "We're just taking what we need. There's no need to thank me. Fellow Taoist's diagram Tao is also very beneficial to me. There's no need to say more, fellow Taoist. Yuan Tong is not an ungrateful person. I'll remember this and will definitely repay you in the future," Yuan Tong said firmly. "Tong, why don't we let little Lei thank you?" Yuan Tong seemed to be unable to wait any longer. However, everyone could see what she meant. She just wanted her son to cultivate this cultivation method as soon as possible. "There's no need to thank me, but this is a newly created method after all. While I'm here, let's let your son cultivate it first. If there are any problems, we can make up for it as soon as possible." Luo Fan smiled. Seeing that both his wife and Luo Fan said this, Yuan Tong followed their advice. He raised his hand and reached into the cave. No one knew what he did, but the entire mountain shook with his movement. After a long while, the tremors subsided, and Yuan Tong pulled back his right hand. In his hand was a gray ape that was 300 meters tall, sleeping soundly. The extremely compressed chaotic vital energy source also floated behind the gray ape as it came out. "Don't be noisy. I still want to sleep." After being caught, the ape's hands scratched everywhere as if it was very unwilling. Its voice was clear, but it was as tender as a 2-year-old baby's. "That's convenient." Luo Fan saw this and knew that Yuan Tong had used great force to break out of the cave. He was full of praise for the physical body that the diagram Tao cultivation method could produce. This kind of power was several times stronger than his own. Coupled with the size of his body, this power was even more terrifying. Based on Luo Fan's concerns, if he continued to cultivate like this, he might even be able to control the sun and moon. "You stinky brat, hurry up and wake up!" Yuan Tong grabbed the gray ape and slapped him on the butt. The force he used was very appropriate. Although it was strong, it only made the ape feel pain, not injury. "That hurts." The ape woke up from the pain and said unhappily. He opened his eyes and looked around, and only then did he realize what kind of situation he was in. "Hey, this little ape is so interesting. It's small and hairless. Although the water gray ape was only a post-celestial creature, its aptitude was naturally too poor compared to innate gods like Luo Fan. However, in terms of absolute aptitude and strength, it was extremely powerful. At this moment, it saw Luo Fan at a glance and said with some surprise, "This is your benefactor. Your benefactor is the one who taught you the cultivation method. Why aren't you thanking him?" Yuan Tong was furious when he heard the ape say this, and he slapped the ape's butt again. Luo Fan stopped him. "There's no need to say that, fellow Taoist. Calling him a benefactor is too much. Besides, this is just a small matter. It's better to quickly teach him the cultivation method and let him cultivate it. It's more important to see how effective it is." Yuan Tong's heart was already aching when she saw how Yuan Tong treated her baby, but she couldn't say anything in front of Luo Fan. When she heard Luo Fan say this, she looked gratefully at Luo Fan and snatched the ape back. That's right, that's right." Yuan Tong couldn't help but smile wryly and glare at the ape. "Yup." The ape was very proud and made a face at Yuan Tong and Luo Fan. Luo Fan found this innocent and pure look quite amusing, but he didn't dislike it in the slightest. Seeing that Luo Fan didn't mind, Yuan Tong didn't bother with the ape's impoliteness. In fact, he didn't really know what politeness was either. After pausing for a moment, he imparted the basic cultivation technique of the pattern returning to origin technique taught by Luo Fan to the gray ape. Although this water gray ape was a few tens of thousands of years old, its growth was extremely slow. At this moment, it was only equivalent to a 2- or 3-year-old infant. Although it matured very early, it was inferior to a true adult, so it was naturally impossible for it to directly pass down the entire cultivation technique to him. This ape's name was Ape Thunder. It was a name that Yuan Tong and Yuan Tong had thought of for thousands of years before coming up with. It contained their hopes for him. However, Ape Thunder was a postnatal lifeform, so he didn't have the qualifications to cultivate their grand Tao of pattern. This worried the couple for tens of thousands of years. They had traveled hundreds of millions of miles and searched for hundreds of connate gods, but they couldn't find any way for Ape Thunder to cultivate their grand Tao of pattern. That was why they gradually became disappointed and lowered their requirements. They only wanted Ape Thunder to have some achievements and didn't expect him to cultivate the grand Tao of pattern. However, even this requirement was difficult to fulfill. However, they never imagined that they would encounter Luo Fan by chance today. Not only would Luo Fan be able to help Yuan Lei achieve something in the future, but he would also be able to help Yuan Lei cultivate the grand Tao of patterns. This simply made them overjoyed, and it was precisely because of this that they acted so urgently at this moment. This cultivation method is so interesting. It's much more fun than Dad's. Ape Thunder murmured as countless strange lines flashed through his eyes. Yuan Tong glanced at Luo Fan with some embarrassment, but Luo Fan just smiled and pretended not to hear. At this time, Ape Thunder was floating in the air with the source of chaotic vital qi, sitting cross-legged above it. Chapter 210. 9 days of pill formation. Yuan Tong and his wife had created this method of channeling chaotic vital qi out of desperation. It was a method that would allow Yuan Lei to achieve the effect of cultivating the great Tao of patterns. This method was quite mysterious and contained many mysteries. Through this method, the chaotic vital qi could be continuously channeled into Yuan Lei's body. Through a special circulation method, his body would be tempered. Through this kind of tempering, his body would constantly change. It allowed its flexibility, toughness, and essence to continuously increase. From his bones, marrow, meridians, and organs outwards, it would eventually reach his skin and hair. It would transform his life essence as well. Using this method to temper his body, in theory, through the accumulation of hundreds of thousands of Yuan Hui, he would be able to cultivate to the undying realm and gain the ability to be reborn from a single drop of blood. However, this was only in theory. This method consumed a great deal of energy. After hundreds of thousands of Yuan Hui, who knew what the untainted world would look like. By then, the connate vital qi that filled the world would probably have already been transformed into acquired vital qi. The nature of the energy in the world would have changed greatly. If they wanted to obtain a great amount of energy to temper their bodies, it would become extremely difficult. By then, the speed at which they used this method to temper their bodies would become slower and slower. In the end, it was more likely that Yuan Lei would gradually lose his vitality in the energy tempering and eventually turn into a chaotic crystal. It would be almost impossible for him to cultivate the undying body. At this time, Yuan Lei had obtained the pattern retrospective technique and the encouragement of his parents. Without any hesitation, he guided the chaotic pneuma that poured into his spine and poured it into his lower abdomen dantian. After some strange changes, it rushed out of the dantian and poured into the meridians, trying to open up one acupoint after another. Acquired life forms were acquired life forms after all. No matter how talented they were, they could not be born with all their meridians opened like connate gods. If they wanted to cultivate, they naturally needed to make some preparations. Luo Fan, Yuan Tong, and Yuan Tong all had great magical powers, so they easily saw Yuan Lei's cultivation process. When they saw Yuan Tong guiding the chaotic vital qi to open up one acupoint after another like a hot knife through butter, they could not help but look satisfied. Yuan Tong, in particular, had an extremely excited look on his face. This was because he could sense that Ape Thunder's aptitude seemed to have improved a little during the process of unblocking his acupoints. This method is really effective. Why didn't I think of opening my meridians to increase my lightning aptitude? Damn it all! Yuan Tong was filled with regret. The great Tao of patterns cultivated the fleshly body. It was a miraculous technique that combined the soul with the fleshly body, finally allowing the fleshly body to undergo a qualitative transformation and achieve an undying body. Both he and Yuan Qi were innate gods, born with all meridians open, their bodies in the most perfect and most suitable state for cultivation. Ever since the two of them had comprehended the great Tao of patterns, it had already established the deepest foundation in his body. It had long surpassed his meridians and was directly used on his body. It constantly refined his body, causing it to constantly transform. Therefore, the husband and wife had never thought that to cultivate this technique, one must first open the meridians. Boom. Poo. Quang. Gee, it was as loud as thunder, but it was very mysterious. It was like some kind of unimaginable music, but it was also like some kind of great Tao sound was constantly emitted from Ape Thunder's body. Along with these sounds, every part of Ape Thunder's body and acupoints seemed to have been detonated one powerful bomb after another. They constantly bulged and caved in during this process. Wisps of strange black gas were shaken out from these places. They were the impurities in his meridians. These bulges and depressions continued to spread along with Ape Thunder's technique, and gradually swam around his entire body. Along with this change, the wisps of power that were constantly emitted from Ape Thunder's body suddenly converged, and in the blink of an eye, they were completely absorbed into his body, no longer leaking out. This was because as the technique circulated, the energy that he had previously been unable to control had been completely absorbed by the technique. Even if it was a little insufficient, how could it still be emitted? At this time, the chaotic vitality source under Ape Thunder's body was still continuously emitting thick chaotic vitality into his body. However, this time, it was not injected into his spine, but directly into his dantian. Moreover, under the operation of the technique, it constantly circulated around his body and was constantly purified. In this process, it became more and more condensed, and the amount also increased. Gradually, it carried a strange aura, as if it had been branded by Ape Thunder. After an unknown period of time, the energy flowing in his meridians had reached a limit, and could hardly be increased anymore. It directly filled up his meridians. At this time, the pattern ancestral technique suddenly changed on its own. All the energy in the meridians suddenly rolled back, and in the blink of an eye, it was completely injected into his lower abdomen where his dantian was. In this limited space, it was extremely compressed. In the end, when this compression reached the extreme, there was already a small, basketball-sized yuan dan in his lower abdomen. Compared to his body that was less than 60 meters tall, such a yuan dan could be considered extremely small. There were a total of 1,296 strange patterns engraved on the surface of this origin core. Every single pattern was extremely profound and seemed to contain some kind of unfathomable mystery. They resonated with a certain part of his body and seemed to have some kind of profound and unfathomable connection with his soul. Wonderful! 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 It's only been 9 days and 9 nights, and he has actually reached the state of core formation. It seems that this technique is very compatible with Ape Thunder. Luo Fan could not help but exclaim. It had been 9 days and 9 nights since Ape Thunder started to practice the pattern ancestral technique, until now. Of course, this period of time was only a short period of time for everyone present. It was almost equivalent to the blink of an eye, so no one would feel the slightest impatience, so no one left. In just 9 days and 9 nights, Ape Thunder had actually directly crossed the first stage of the technique, the Qi refinement stage, and reached core formation. This kind of speed could be said to be no slower than that of an innate god. How could Luo Fan not be amazed? However, his admiration was not for Ape Thunder, but for Yuan Tong and his wife. The reason why Ape Thunder was able to reach this level was not because of anything else, but because of the hard work of Yuan Tong and his wife over the past tens of thousands of years. It was precisely because Yuan Tong had continuously poured chaotic qi into Ape Thunder's body over the past tens of thousands of years, continuously increasing the strength of Ape Thunder's body. As a result, Ape Thunder's body was able to contain so much energy and support the operation of the pattern ancestral technique. In the end, he was able to break through the Qi refinement stage and reach core formation in just 9 days and 9 nights. After the formation of the core formation, Ape Thunder was still not satisfied. He continued to operate the technique and frantically extracted the chaotic Qi contained in the extremely rich chaotic Qi source below. He continuously transferred it into his dantian and replenished the core formation. As it was replenished, the patterns on the core formation flickered with all sorts of mysterious lights, and the core formation grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, by the time all the chaotic Qi source had been poured into it, the core formation had only grown to the size of 2 basketballs. Compared to his body, it was still so small that it was almost undetectable. By the time all the chaotic Qi had entered the core formation, another 3 days and 3 nights had passed. When the chaotic Qi in the outside world had become so thin that it was almost undetectable, Ape Thunder could not help but open his eyes in annoyance. He looked around and said, "Why is there no more?" That comfortable Qi on the other side, Yuan Tong and Yuan Qi's faces were already covered in tears. Their tears were filled with both joy and unimaginable shock. They had spent thousands of years compressing this chaotic energy source, which was nearly 100 miles wide, to an extreme degree to create it. According to their calculations, the chaotic Qi source should have been enough for Ape Thunder to absorb and refine for several periods of time. However, they had never thought that it would only take tens of thousands of years for the chaotic Qi source to be completely absorbed by Ape Thunder in just 12 days. One could imagine the shock and joy they were feeling. Good boy! The Yuan Qi could not suppress the emotions in his heart. He opened his arms and hugged Ape Thunder. Thunder Ape was shocked to see the giant ape's hands and extremely fast speed. He had no time to react to the fact that it was his mother. His body instinctively dodged before his consciousness could react. He turned in the air at a speed that was almost like teleportation and avoided the ape's embrace. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water. It was extremely natural. The Yuan Qi was overjoyed by this change. It must be said that although Ape Thunder's physique was extremely good, he had only been tempered passively. How could he use any magical powers? Even the innate ability to control water and earth that the husband and wife had brought with them was too weak to be dealt with. If he had not cultivated the pattern precedence reversal technique, he could only move in the air with the help of the chaotic Qi source, let alone avoid the Yuan Qi's hug. Now that he was able to avoid the Yuan Qi's hug so easily, it meant that he already had magical powers. Since he had already stepped onto the path of cultivation, how could she not be happy? Luo Fan, who was watching from the side, was affected by their heartfelt joy, and couldn't help but show a faint smile on his face. After all, Ape Thunder had only just formed the primal core, and had not studied magical powers in detail. How could he avoid the Yuan Qi's hug if he only dodged instinctively? After a short while, he was tightly locked in the Yuan Qi's embrace. After tens of thousands of years of pursuit, there is finally a result. "Thank you, fellow cultivator," Yuan Tong said to Luo Fan with a look of relief. "The success of this technique also means that my guess is correct. There is no need to thank me." Luo Fan shook his head. Chapter 211. The Mysteries of the Earth, a Treasured Land of Cultivation. Why are you in such a hurry? You've been busy for my son over the past few days, and I haven't even thanked you yet. How can you just leave like this? Why don't you stay for a few dozen years? Perhaps we can discuss the Tao, or perhaps we can find some things to thank you, Yuan Tong hurriedly said. You're too kind, fellow. The pattern Tao is more than enough for this cultivation technique. It would be shameless of me to stay any longer. So be it, fellow. We'll meet again in the future if fate allows it. Farewell. Luo Fan waved his hand. As he spoke, he turned into a streak of azure light that shot into the sky at a speed that surpassed Yuan Tong's reaction speed. In the blink of an eye, he had already disappeared from Yuan Tong's sight. Yuan Tong was just about to urge him to stay when he realized that Luo Fan had already disappeared. He anxiously called out a few times, but it was to no avail. He could only sigh helplessly from below. Only then did Yuan Tong recover from his joy. He also noticed that Luo Fan had left, and he was filled with regret. She was even more grateful to Luo Fan than Yuan Tong, and the regret she felt when she saw Luo Fan leave was several times greater than Yuan Tong's. However, now that her son was able to embark on the path of cultivation, she was more satisfied than anything else. This regret did not linger in her heart for too long before it disappeared. As for Yuan Lei, he was already dizzy from being strangled by Yuan Tong. He only had one thought in his mind, and that was to struggle out of his mother's embrace. How could he have the time to pay attention to Luo Fan? Luo Fan did not choose any particular direction. He was only following his instincts, and he was currently heading south. The streak of light was extremely fast, and he was already 1,000,000 kilometers away from Yuan Tong's family of 3 in an instant. Luo Fan's expression was calm, and his eyes shone brightly. However, he could not help but curse himself inwardly. Why didn't I think of that? Since blood rebirth can be cultivated in another way, I should be able to search for the vast freedom demon lord in another direction as well. Cursing in his heart, his mind slightly moved, and one end of the dark green rainbow suddenly pressed down, directly colliding with the ground. At the instant it crashed into the ground, there was a flash of light, giving the cyan ray a mysterious and unfathomable aura. This aura was quite mysterious, but it gave the ray the ability to escape through the earth. In an instant it sank into the solid ground below like a fish diving into the sea. The yellow spring was located 4,900 kilometers below the surface. The yellow springs meandered and had countless tributaries. They circled around like a huge net and almost covered the entire underground of the primordial world. Although the place where Luo Fan landed was only 1,000,000 miles away from the main stream of the yellow springs, which Luo Fan came out from, there was still a small tributary. The speed of the rainbow was extremely fast. In just a short while, it brought Luo Fan straight into the yellow springs. The tributary was not big, only about 10 kilometers wide. However, the number of invisible talisman ghosts and visible talisman ghosts had already returned to normal. Within the range of Luo Fan's senses, there were countless of them, and they brought rich vitality to the yellow spring water. Luo Fan did not stay here. With a thought, the dark green rainbow continued to descend, flying straight to the bottom of the yellow springs. Along the way, the invisible talisman ghosts could not detect Luo Fan's passing. Even if they passed by the rainbow, they only knew to look around blankly. In a short while, the rainbow arrived at the bottom of the yellow springs and rushed straight to the bottom of the yellow springs. The location of the yellow springs was like a dividing line, dividing the ground into 2 levels. From the top of the yellow springs to the surface, there were many kinds of resentment in the ground, and there were countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures. However, compared to the bottom of the yellow springs, they could be said to be so few that they were negligible. In the 100 kilometers that Luo Fan passed through the yellow springs, he encountered tens of thousands of heavenly materials and earthly treasures that could not be found in the 4,900 kilometers above. The chi of the earth contained in the ground was so rich that it almost condensed into a substance. Strands of earthy yellow chi of the earth directly reflected the ground, making it look like a piece of meat with countless meridians and blood vessels. However, what increased at the same time was the evil earth chi and heavy turbid yin chi contained in the ground. Among them, the evil earth chi was extremely harmful to the soul, and it was extremely chaotic, almost uncontrollable. Although Luo Fan had seen the Yellow Springs several times, it was the first time that he had passed through it and descended. At this moment, when he saw the surrounding scenery, he could not help but be secretly surprised, and felt that he had really missed many things in the past. Even though the baleful earth chi was rather dangerous, it was only for ordinary living beings. To Luo Fan, who'd attained the earthly immortal Tao fruit and had even attained the golden immortal realm, it was simply a treasure trove. The heavenly materials and earthly treasures contained here were tempered by the evil earth chi and heavy turbid yin chi, and the same materials were at least a level better than those above. The materials collected here only needed to be slightly refined, and they would become powerful magic tools that could not be underestimated. Master, this is really a good place. If these evil earth chi are collected, it can definitely make my body twice as strong. Quickly collect it for me, please. The Xuanji child began to clamor in Luo Fan's mind again. Luo Fan was the refiner of the Xuanji robe. At this moment, with a slight sense, he knew that the Xuanji child was speaking the truth. If the endless evil earth chi was integrated into the Xuanji robe, the nature of the Xuanji robe would change slightly. Not only would the body become much stronger, it might even have the ability to damage the soul, and its power would be greatly increased. However, why would he specially collect these evil earth chi for the Xuanji child? What did he refine the Xuanji child for? Therefore, he only nodded and said, "You can collect it yourself." The Xuanji child was very content. Although Luo Fan did not collect it for her, with Luo Fan's approval, she still cheered. As she cheered, millions of rays of dark green light rushed out of the rainbow that Luo Fan had transformed into. In an instant, they weaved and transformed into a large silk net that was tens of thousands of miles in circumference. As if covering the sky and earth, it constantly wrapped around the increasingly dense evil earth chi in the ground and sucked it into the rainbow that Luo Fan had transformed into like water. An extremely satisfied moan appeared in Luo Fan's mind. It was the Xuanji child who was satisfied with the endless evil earth chi, and there seemed to be an endless sense of pleasure. The Xuanji child had a rather strong spiritual consciousness. Small matters like collecting evil earth chi did not require Luo Fan's attention. He did not care and only controlled the rainbow to descend. Occasionally, he would see some heavenly treasures that were difficult to find above and casually collect them. His speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he had traversed tens of thousands of miles and arrived at the ground layer that was 14,900 miles underground. There were tens of thousands of materials collected. However, all these materials only occupied a small amount of space in the sleeve universe. It was less than 1% of the space. The sleeve universe, which had expanded a lot, was already abnormally empty. This depth of 14,900 miles seemed to be a special depth. Here, the evil earth chi and the heavy turbid extreme yin chi had already intertwined and condensed into a substance. It gathered together with the boundless origin energy of the earth, forming an extremely strange layer that seemed to be incomparably dangerous, yet also incomparably safe. The structure of the untainted land stratum was very strange. As far as Luo Fan knew at this time, the area within 4,900 kilometers of the ground could be called a cultivation treasure land. There were countless treasures of heaven and earth in this area, as well as countless sources of chaotic vitality. Moreover, because these chaotic origin chi had formed at the beginning of the world, not much had dissipated. Therefore, compared to the surface, the chaotic origin chi in the caves leading to the surface, it was much denser. Cultivating there was no need to worry about not having chaotic origin chi to absorb. 4,900 miles down to the depth of 14,000 miles, the evil earth chi grew thicker and thicker, and there was even more heavy yin chi. As a result, even though there were more natural treasures in this area, and the number of chaotic energy sources did not decrease by much, It made a large part of the underground look extremely dangerous, and was not suitable for cultivation. In front of Luo Fan, the evil earth chi, the heavy turbid extreme yin chi, and the chaotic origin chi were all connected with the earth chi, forming a very strange substance. This caused the nature of each energy to change slightly. The evil earth chi's ability to harm the spirit was weakened to the minimum, and the heavy turbid extreme yin chi became less extreme. This made this depth of stratum once again a cultivation treasure land. Although the environment below was far from Buzhou Mountain, it was much better than ordinary cultivation treasure lands. However, it was extremely difficult to reach this depth. Those who had not cultivated enough would not be able to pass through the dangerous strata that was tens of thousands of miles thick. However, those who had cultivated enough would not be interested in such a precious cultivation ground 14,000 miles below. This could also be considered a kind of balance between the heavens and the earth, so full. I really can't eat any more. Although it had only been less than half a day since they arrived here, Xuanji Boy had already absorbed hundreds of millions of tons of baleful earth chi. At this moment, he finally sighed in Luo Fan's mind. Master, I've absorbed too much evil earth chi. I'm going to sleep now. Xuanji Boy's somewhat lazy voice sounded. Luo Fan said indifferently, just go. Don't be noisy. So heartless. I've suffered a blow. Xuanji Boy mumbled, and then fell silent. Luo Fan knew that Xuanji Boy had no sense of self, and this performance was just words without meaning. But he still felt a sense of warmth, and a faint smile appeared on his face. The smile disappeared as soon as it appeared. With a turn of his body, he broke into the stratum formed by the condensation of all kinds of energy. As soon as he entered, a cool and warm feeling emerged in his mind. Taking a deep breath, the rolling energy surged into his body and rushed straight into the earthly immortal's Tao fruit that seemed to be both real and illusory. After being shaken by the earthly immortal's Tao fruit, it turned into extremely pure energy and was completely absorbed by the magical power units within. The structure of the earthly immortal Tao fruit was very mysterious, but it was not formed by the accumulation of magical power units. When the energy surged into it, it instantly circulated 518,400 magical power units, causing the 12,960 strange patterns to flicker and seem to be filled up a little. It's really a blessed place for cultivation. If I have time in the future, I may be able to open another cave abode here. Luo Fan thought in his heart, but his strange habit of opening a cave abode was triggered again. Fortunately, he knew that the current situation was not suitable. The thought flashed across his mind, and his figure continued to rush down. As he went down, the various kinds of energy became more and more intertwined. After another 10,000 miles, the various kinds of energy had become chaotic, and could no longer be distinguished from each other. Moreover, other than these kinds of energy, there were very few substances that could resist the erosion of this kind of energy. However, once there was the existence of this kind of plant that was not eroded by the energy, it was an extremely rare treasure. Luo Fan urgently needed materials to replenish the sleeve creator, so he would not let go of such a rare treasure. Chapter 212. Earth Fire Magma, born in the morning and dead in the evening. This layer of chaotic energy, which was a mixture of all kinds of yuan qi and the essence of all kinds of materials, extended for nearly 20,000 miles before it was replaced by another layer. 50,000 miles underground, all kinds of chaotic energies seem to have gone through a series of fundamental changes after being bred for a few times. Endless explosive changes occurred almost without any warning. The chaotic energy seemed to have been ignited, and the originally extremely condensed energy, which was almost tangible, transformed into a very strange liquid existence, emitting endless heat. This liquid was piled up nearly 50,000 miles above the ground. To be exact, it was 49,000 miles below the ground. A huge layer of magma was formed in that area, constantly roasting the thick ground, allowing the chaotic energy to generate some kind of rare impetus. As a result, the chaotic energy didn't show any signs of death, but flowed continuously underground like a liquid. When Luo Fan came to this junction, he suddenly felt that the cool and warm feeling around him, as if he was in a treasure land for cultivation, had completely disappeared. The dark red lava, which emitted endless heat, was surging down below, like a ferocious monster opening its huge mouth, waiting for him to enter. At this time, Luo Fan's great sun-golden eyes and bright moon-silver eyes were still working. His eyes turned, and in a flash of golden and silver light, he had already seen through the secrets of the earth-fire magma down below. The earth-fire magma in front of him was a mixture of the earth's yuan qi, evil qi, heavy yin qi, chaotic yuan qi, connate yuan qi, and various other kinds of yuan qi, all kinds of energy, and the essence of all kinds of natural treasures. Under the incomparably great pressure of the earth, they had reached a critical point of some mysterious reaction and finally produced an explosive change. After such a transformation, the environment above, which was originally like a treasure land for cultivation, instantly changed completely. Not to mention suitable for cultivators, even if a cultivator had a slightly weaker defensive ability, entering it would be courting death. I didn't expect there to be so many types of earth fire. Luo Fan had already expected this, but he still couldn't help but praise it when he saw it with his own eyes. There were countless types of earthly fire below, and there were billions of them. They intertwined with each other, forming a dark red color that had the ability to corrode the bodies of living beings. Even when the beam of light floated 100 miles away from the lava, Luo Fan could sense wisps of strange heat striking the beam of light and drilling into his body, trying to penetrate through the protection of the beam of light and corrode his body. This heat was so strange and its corrosive ability was so strong that if not for the extremely strong defense of the Star Pearl robe, Luo Fan would probably have to use his own remarkable ability to completely resist the corrosion of this heat. With a slight thought, the dark green beam of light that Luo Fan had transformed condensed into a dark green-robed Luo Fan who stood 100 miles above the lava. After entering this place, the surrounding environment was too complicated. Transforming into a beam of light was no longer of much use to increase his speed, so there was naturally no need for him to maintain this state that was suitable for flight. At this moment, when Luo Fan's figure condensed, countless changes suddenly occurred in the magma 100 miles below him. Seemingly agitated by his aura, countless amounts of lava quickly gathered together, surged, flowed, and gradually produced some kind of profound and unfathomable change. In the end, they turned into various lava creatures of various sizes, gentle and tame, or violent and ferocious. These creatures came in different shapes, but they had one thing in common. That was, their form was quite similar to the astral wind, lightning, and fire life forms in the layer of astral wind, lightning, and fire. Inside them, there were even strange three-dimensional patterns that were still constantly evolving and gradually taking shape. They seemed extremely profound, but they were not complete. After these strange three-dimensional patterns were formed, they seemed to turn into black holes, madly absorbing the mysterious and indescribable aura that Luo Fan emitted. Through the agitation of this aura, some kind of incredible effect was produced. It caused some kind of profound and mysterious change to occur in the lava, causing the strange three-dimensional patterns inside the bodies of the lava creatures to gradually be completed, causing the spiritual sense of these lava creatures to become more and more complete. These creatures that were gradually taking shape constantly roared at Luo Fan and struggled madly, as if they wanted to pounce on Luo Fan, but were powerless to break free from the restriction of the lava layer. The roars and struggles of these creatures seemed to contain endless joy, incomparable anger, extremely docile, and extremely crazy. Luo Fan frowned imperceptibly. Looking around, he found that these creatures only appeared within a radius of 1,000 miles, which happened to be the range of his aura. In the blink of an eye, He knew that these creatures were indeed produced under the influence of his aura. He couldn't help but feel inexplicably surprised. He raised his hand and waved. In the lava layer below, a ball of lava that was thousands of feet in size flew up through the obstruction of countless lava creatures and arrived in front of Luo Fan in the blink of an eye. He raised his hand and rubbed it in the air. As his aura poured into it, the ball of lava began to undergo a profound and inexplicable change. Inside the magma, there were many mysterious and unfathomable patterns forming. Along with the changes of these patterns, this large mass of magma suddenly turned into a flood dragon, then into a tiger, then into an insect, then into a bird, then into a fish. All kinds of creatures that Luo Fan had seen and thought of were being evolved from this little bit of magma, and the transformation of these creatures changed according to the change of his aura. Every time the will contained in his aura changed slightly, the lava would naturally transform into another form. There were thousands of changes, tens of thousands of forms, and there was nothing wrong with it. The spiritual consciousness of these lava creatures was extremely simple and could not be called complete. It seemed to only have an extremely simple instinct. They only knew to swallow the aura to strengthen themselves and knew that getting close to Luo Fan would bring them endless benefit. Other than that, they had no other knowledge. Luo Fan carefully observed the transformation process of these lava creatures, and then combined it with the essence of the lava reflected by his golden eyes of the great sun and silver eyes of the bright moon to make deductions. When the transformation of the lava creatures was exhausted, his understanding of the lava had reached an unimaginable level. This lava was formed by all kinds of yuan qi, evil spirit qi, and the essence of heavenly materials and earthly treasures through a variety of mysterious and indescribable changes. It was not as simple as raising the temperature of the rocks and soil to a higher level. The process of its formation contained infinite vitality and endless life force. It was only because there was no primer, no suitable environment, that these vitality and life force could not produce a qualitative change and could not condense into a real creature. And at this time, Luo Fan's aura was equivalent to this primer. The tenacity of the desire to live was extremely incredible. With this bit of life primer, even though the environment within the lava wasn't very suitable, the boundless life force and the boundless life force automatically evolved into countless changes and condensed into countless life forms within the lava. It was just that this environment was after all very unsuitable, so this kind of evolution required a huge amount of time. If this evolution process lost Luo Fan's aura as a primer, these lava would turn back into lava and completely lose the possibility of forming. Knowing this, Luo Fan already knew what he had to do. He raised his hand and gently pulling out the aura that was attracted by the hundreds of feet diameter ball of lava in front of him. This lava creature completely collapsed in an instant, turning back into the lava. Then, with a slight thought, there were countless three-dimensional talismans flashing above the lava. Luo Fan took a step forward and stepped onto the red cloud. He felt that his feet were soft and tough, and the feeling was quite wonderful. At the same time, his connection with the outside world was completely isolated by this red cloud, so the heat of the outside world could not corrode him, and his aura did not leak out. Without Luo Fan's aura as a guide, all the lava within a radius of 1,000 miles instantly let out an incomparably shrill and miserable howl. In the blink of an eye, it completely collapsed, turning back into ordinary lava and fusing with the lava layer. With a ripple, it disappeared without a trace, as if nothing had happened. Seeing so many creatures that were born because of him disappear, although Luo Fan knew that these creatures did not have a complete spiritual sense, and only had simple instincts, he still felt a little emotional. With a single thought, the crimson cloud he was riding on spun around, covering a distance of over 50 kilometers and diving straight into the lava down below. These dark red auspicious clouds were originally refined from lava. Naturally, it had a strong restraining effect on the lava. Under its protection, the heat above the lava, which was tens of thousands of times stronger than above, was completely isolated, no longer able to have any corrosive effect on him. Moreover, the aura on his body was completely isolated by the dark red auspicious clouds, and it was difficult for even a trace of it to be emitted. Even the lava that was dozens of feet away from him couldn't sense a trace of his aura. In such a state, when Luo Fan entered the lava layer, he did not cause the slightest change. Like a drop of water falling into the ocean, not even a ripple could be felt. In the endless lava, in the heat that could burn steel into molten steel, and diamonds into nothingness, Luo Fan leisurely drifted on a cloud. Such a contradictory scene would make one involuntarily feel reverence. The nature of the lava was very special, and the various energies within it were extremely corrosive, even to the star pearl robe, let alone the other impurities within it. Compared to the tens of thousands of miles of chaotic layer above, the impurities in the lava layer were much less, and of course these impurities were even more precious. As Luo Fan casually collected the materials he encountered along the way, he continued to descend. Chapter 213. The thickness of the magma layer was 40,000 miles thick. For Luo Fan, who was under the protection of the auspicious cloud, this only meant that the thickness of the layer where he could collect the treasures was only 40,000 miles thick. Riding on the crimson magic cloud, Luo Fan continued to descend. In less than half a day, Luo Fan had already descended 40,000 miles into the magma layer. His universe in his sleeve had been replenished by the heavenly materials and earthly treasures in this 40,000-mile area. More than half of it was filled, but it could no longer be called empty. When he reached a depth of 90,000 kilometers, Luo Fan raised his eyes and looked around. All he could see was darkness. It was a darkness that seemed to devour all light, yet there was not a trace of ferocity. It was extremely peaceful and deep, a darkness that could make anyone completely calm down. As Luo Fan rode the crimson auspicious clouds and stopped at this depth, he sensed an incomparably peaceful and deep presence rolling towards him from the darkness below. With this presence, the heat that was constantly pouring into his body from the auspicious clouds around him was gradually isolated. Sensing the changes in the surrounding aura, Luo Fan instantly understood. He was already at the extreme end of the earth. Although he could still descend, and could even descend for a very long distance, once he stepped into this darkness, he would no longer be in the ground. Instead, he would enter an even more mysterious and unpredictable region. Thinking back to the journey he had gone through after entering the underground, a familiar feeling suddenly entered Luo Fan's heart. Although the heaven and earth were vastly different, in some ways they were similar. The sky was 90,000 kilometers wide. Above the sky was the strong wind, lightning and fire layer, and 10,000 kilometers above the strong wind, lightning and fire layer was the endless starry sky. The ground was 90,000 kilometers wide. Below this 90,000 kilometers was boundless darkness. Luo Fan could even imagine that below this boundless darkness, there should be a place similar to the endless starry sky. Understanding this completely different yet exceptionally similar connection between heaven and earth, an indescribable feeling suddenly surged into his heart. This kind of enlightenment was extremely mysterious. It made him feel as if he had understood something, but at the same time, he didn't seem to understand anything. Although this kind of comprehension was indescribably wonderful and hard to grasp, the effects it produced were indeed real. The world of his sea of consciousness became a little more stable with this kind of enlightenment. With a thought, Luo Fan controlled the crimson cloud and sank into the endless darkness below. Not long after, he rode the cloud into the infinite darkness. As the auspicious cloud disappeared into the darkness, an extremely tranquil and aloof feeling welled up in his heart. It filled his every thought and made him feel incomparably tranquil. Suddenly, he seemed to feel that the endless darkness around him was the beginning and the end of everything. It was as if the entire world and the primal chaos had started from this darkness, and it was also as if the entire world and the primal chaos would eventually return to this darkness. The auspicious cloud of the 12 restrictions couldn't resist the surrounding endless darkness at all. Instead, it was gradually eroded and assimilated in this endless darkness. In the blink of an eye, it had already turned jet black. It looked no different from the surrounding endless darkness, and it was even difficult to see clearly. Luo Fan had the great sun golden eyes and the bright moon silver eyes. Although there wasn't any light in the surroundings, even the crimson lava above him couldn't let any light pass through. This place still belonged to the untainted land after all. Since it belonged to the untainted land, the pair of eyes obtained from the Pengu chaotic heavenly pupils possessed all kinds of special magical powers. It was only a matter of time for him to see the surrounding environment clearly. As his line of sight changed, Luo Fan had already seen the surrounding darkness clearly. The surrounding endless darkness wasn't empty. It could even be said that the substance content of any place he passed by, any terrain or environment, was far less than this place. The boundless darkness was filled with a myriad of strange existences that were extremely tiny like specks of dust, yet were able to absorb all light. They were calm, deathly silent to the extreme, and emanated strands of an aura that calmed one's mind. The number of such tiny existences had reached an unimaginable level. They were even denser than the densest crystals and the densest strata. Moreover, they were distributed very evenly, just like the vitality on the earth, covering everything within his sight. Even at this moment, they were constantly inhaling and exhaling inside and outside of his body along with his breathing. The auspicious cloud that could defend against the temperature of molten steel and stone could do nothing to these tiny existences that were as tiny as specks of dust but had infinite assimilation power. In the few breaths of time he entered this endless darkness, this auspicious cloud had already lost its effect. After all, this auspicious cloud was casually refined by Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan was surprised that it had lost its effect so quickly, he didn't feel too much heartache. With a thought, he waved his hand, and the 12 restrictions contained within the auspicious cloud instantly collapsed. As the restrictions collapsed, the auspicious cloud instantly expanded under Luo Fan's feet, turning from the original diameter of 30 feet to a sphere that was 300 feet in diameter. There was a strong dark red light that burst out from it, and there was also a tremendous amount of heat that attacked him. However, whether it was the light or the heat, they only appeared for an instant. After an extremely short instant, whether it was the light or the heat, they were completely devoured by the tiny existences that were like specks of dust, and they instantly disappeared without a trace. At the same time, the lava was also assimilated and devoured by the existence that was as tiny as specks of dust, but it contained endless mysteries. All of it was transformed into tiny existences that were as tiny as the dark existences. Its nature also changed from its original violent nature to extremely calm and peaceful, as if it had finally found its home. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He raised his hand and grabbed lightly. The tiny existences within 30 feet in front of him continued to gather, gradually gathering into a fist-sized black ball in front of him. There's actually such a change? I didn't expect it to be so profound. The moment the small ball was formed, Luo Fan was suddenly shocked. His eyes lit up, and his golden and silver pupils instantly enveloped the small ball, illuminating the inside and outside of the small ball. As the density of the tiny existences increased, an extremely strange, obscure, but real life force suddenly appeared in the center of the small ball. This life force kept evolving, and in the end, it turned into a bat-like creature that was the size of 2 fingers. However, it was completely different from a bat. It seemed more powerful, more agile, and more unbelievable. Swish, a sound wave that far exceeded the range of ordinary people's hearing rang out from the bat's mouth. As the sound came out from the bat's mouth, The countless tiny existences in the surroundings started to tremble weakly but mysteriously. It was as if they were transmitting some kind of mysterious information, or exchanging some kind of mysterious information. The frequency of this sound wave far exceeded the range of ordinary people's hearing, but it naturally could not exceed Luo Fan's hearing. After listening carefully, Luo Fan already knew that this sound wave was an existence similar to vision. It was the bat's method of perceiving things, and it was not much different from his own eyes. Just as Luo Fan was very interested and wanted to carefully study the state of this bat, an inexplicable sense of danger suddenly appeared in his mind. As this sense of danger appeared, an extremely terrifying invisible force suddenly appeared in all directions and squeezed toward Luo Fan at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, countless heavenly Sanskrit chants appeared in Luo Fan's ears. He knew that everything was still dark in front of him, and all the light was still completely absorbed by those tiny existences. However, he still felt that there was endless golden light in front of him, as if there were countless heavenly flowers falling and countless golden lotuses gushing out. It was as if in the blink of an eye, the entire world had become the legendary Western paradise. Mahasvara Demon Master. In an instant, such a name appeared in Luo Fan's mind. In this chaotic world, Luo Fan had encountered very few living beings, and there were very few living beings that could shake his tenacious mind and could break through his body's instinctive defenses. The Mahasvara Demon Master was clearly one of them. And this method was clearly not the method of nurturing living beings in the endless darkness, so it was very likely that it was Luo Fan's target this time, the Mahasvara Demon Master. Knowing that this was very likely the target's method, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly. The dark green Big Dipper robe flashed, and the terrifying invisible force that attacked from all directions was isolated. At the same time, the earthly immortal's Tao fruit in his body shook violently. His mind and will also produced extremely violent ripples, and the golden and silver light in his eyes flickered rapidly. He had already broken through the endless golden light and countless heavenly Sanskrit chants, and found the source of the attack. It was a middle-aged man wearing a starlight robe and a tall hat. He had a dignified expression, and in the darkness, he seemed to be the center of the entire dark space, suppressing the entire void. "Welcome to the 18 levels of hell," the middle-aged man said as he looked in the direction where Luo Fan was at the moment when he turned his gaze to Luo Fan. As he said this, the entire dark space suddenly underwent an incredible change, as if the entire space was rippling with his words, and some incredible changes were occurring. When Luo Fan saw this dignified middle-aged man, he immediately knew that this person was definitely not the Mahasvara Demon Master's true form. This was because he was completely formed from the endless tiny existences around him. It was just like the bat inside the fist-sized sphere in front of Luo Fan. The only difference was that this middle-aged man had gathered thousands of times more tiny existences than the bat. Chapter 214. Luo Fan casually grabbed the black ball in front of him and crushed it into powder that scattered in all directions. The bat-like life form in the black ball naturally collapsed and died with this pinch, scattering in all directions along with the powder. The 18 levels of hell are the most beautiful places in the primordial world. The middle-aged man was expressionless, and his tone was flat. However, it had an indescribable charm, as if it contained infinite majesty. As he said that, countless tiny existences around him gathered towards him. They gradually accumulated around him, producing endless strange lights that flickered around him. Gradually they formed 18 strange worlds. Each of these 18 worlds occupied a square area around his body. They were all different in size, and there was not a single trace of similarity between them. Their structures were extremely profound, reaching an unfathomable level. The 18 worlds were intertwined, constantly circulating, constantly entangling, and constantly influencing each other. Although they seemed to be scattered all over the place, the 18 worlds intertwined. Although they seemed to be distributed everywhere, it felt like they were a complete world. Moreover, they were completely independent, making them seem extremely mysterious. Within these 18 worlds, the light and shadows formed a vicious and ugly punishment, as if there were countless evil spirits and yikshas torturing countless living beings. These 18 worlds were not unchanging. Their positions were not fixed either. Instead, they were constantly circulating, and the worlds were constantly alternating. Their positions were constantly changing, and the laws of their changes were complicated and mysterious. It seemed to contain some mysterious and indescribable secret. Luo Fan's eyes narrowed. As golden and silver light flashed in his eyes, he carefully examined the laws of the 18 worlds' changes. In the blink of an eye, he obtained a very obscure sequence of the 18 worlds. He was filled with admiration, and at the same time, he had an inexplicable understanding. The various scenes within the 18 kilograms world began to change extremely rapidly as the worlds changed. At the same time, the area of the 18 worlds began to increase. In the blink of an eye, the 18 worlds had increased to a radius of 100,000 kilometers, and they directly arrived in front of Luo Fan. It looked like it was about to swallow Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan had already seen a trace of the veins of this world and understood a trace of the mysteries of these 18 worlds. With a thought, golden and silver light flickered in his eyes, and the space-time in front of him was violently distorted. After the distortion, a passageway appeared in front of him, leading to the dark incarnation that was 100,000 miles away. The Panga heavenly pupil is indeed very mysterious. However, how much power can you unleash? This divine ability of mine is an inherent divine ability of my dark incarnation. It has the ability to open up space-time and devour all living beings. You're still lacking if you want to dodge it. The dark incarnation of the great freedom heavenly demon lord spat out emotionlessly. His words were as majestic as the voice of the great Tao. This sentence shook the entire dark space, as if the entire space was responding to his words. As he spoke, the 18 worlds, like 18 palms, squeezed towards the distorted passageway that Luo Fan was in. In the blink of an eye, the passageway that Luo Fan had created with the help of the golden eyes of the great sun and the silver eyes of the bright moon completely collapsed, and the passageway was once again filled up by the 18 world. The moment the passageway was crushed, Luo Fan only felt his eyes tremble slightly, as if he had been heavily punched. However, he did not feel the slightest bit unhappy because of this. Instead, an indifferent smile appeared on his face, as if everything was under control. Through the compression of these 18 worlds, he had a deeper understanding of the mysteries of these 18 worlds. Although he still could not see through the origins of these 18 worlds, he already knew that the countless punishments in these 18 worlds, and the constantly changing worlds, were all just illusions. Among these 18 worlds, the deepest secret and the most powerful power was the change of spacetime. Knowing this, he already had a rough idea of how to break through these 18 worlds. Without stopping, he lifted his foot and stepped lightly into the world in front of him. In an instant, he felt that he had already disappeared from the primitive world and arrived in a desolate world filled with countless raging bulls the size of a mountain. The ground of this world was completely filled with raging bulls, so densely packed that there was almost no space left. These raging bulls ran over from infinitely far away and ran to infinitely far away places. Looking at the size of these raging bulls and looking at the space that they filled, this entire world seemed to have no space for the raging bulls to run in circles. However, they were running at an incomparably fast speed. The mystery behind this is quite mysterious. And below these raging bulls, there were countless lives being trampled by these raging bulls in a frenzy. They continuously howled miserably. When the raging bulls stepped on them, they turned into minced meat. When the raging bulls left, they came back to life. This cycle repeated endlessly, and the cruelty had reached an unbearable level. When Luo Fan stepped into this world, he knew that this world was the bull pit hell of the 18 layers of hell. Legend had it that in the mortal world, anyone who killed animals at will would be thrown into this hell and suffer countless years of trampling. In this bull pit hell, there seemed to be no vitality, no energy, and even the laws of space were completely different from the primitive world. Stepping into it, Luo Fan felt that all his magical powers were far away from him. His figure landed, and in the blink of an eye, he was already in the midst of the raging bulls. The raging bulls the size of a mountain lifted their huge hooves and trampled towards him. Such an illusion was already useless when I was going through the heavenly tribulation, let alone now. Luo Fan smiled and sighed. He looked up at the raging bull's hooves that were trampling towards him, and with a light step, he directly passed through the hooves and stepped 100 miles above the raging bulls. He looked down at the endless raging bulls below. Then, his eyes flashed. The whole world changed in an instant. It was no longer boundless. Instead, it only had a radius of 100,000 kilometers. Moreover, it was no longer an independent world. Instead, it was 18 worlds stacked on top of each other. The scenery constantly changed, but the essence of it remained the same. The 18 worlds fused together. It was like a complete world. These 18 worlds were like 18 parts of this complete world, and the various punishments, all kinds of indescribably ferocious and cruel punishments, were just illusions created by the flow of energy in the 18 parts of this world, even though these illusions created by the vast Freedom Devil Lord had incredible power. The vast Freedom Devil Lord's dark incarnation was in the center of this world, the core. At this moment, he stood in the darkness with a calm expression. His starry robe fluttered without wind, and there seemed to be a huge force in the void combining with him, forming an indescribably mysterious whole. The flow of energy in the 18 parts of this world seemed to be evolving some kind of mystery of spacetime. After Luo Fan said that, the vast Freedom Devil Lord looked up and saw Luo Fan's figure as if he could see through the infinite spacetime. Luo Fan was currently floating casually in the void. The rules of this world were very strange, and it seemed to be able to suppress the flow of magic power, making him feel like he had become an ordinary person, without a trace of extraordinary power. But that was all. His mana naturally could not be suppressed because of this. His extremely high cultivation level could not be blinded because of this. As long as he could see through the reality of this world, it was as if he had broken through the barrier that blinded his senses. He could use his own power at will. Although the 18 layers of hell were divided into the hell of tongue pulling, the hell of scissors, the hell of iron tree, the hell of mirror of sin, and so on, in reality, the 18 layers of hell did not refer to the 18 spaces, but to the 18 divisions of time. The first layer of hell referred to the punishment of 13.5 billion years, and this punishment could be any of the 18 minor hells. The second layer of hell was the punishment of the first layer of hell, which was 20 times more than the punishment of the first layer of hell. It could also be any one of them. Hence, the punishment of every layer of hell was 20 times more than the previous layer of hell. This continued until the 18th layer of hell reached an indescribable amount of time. If this happened in the primordial world, the entire primordial world would probably decline and be destroyed, and it would not reach the end of this layer of hell. It's a pity that although you have comprehended the true meaning of the 18 layers of hell, your cultivation realm is not enough to fully develop it. Otherwise, the power of this hell would not be limited to this. Gold and silver light flickered in Luo Fan's eyes as he sighed softly. The area below 90,000 miles underground was the 18 layers of hell. This does not mean that there are such various punishments underground, but the speed of time passing here. The slowest first layer of hell is 3,750 years, which is equivalent to a day in the primordial world. At the bottom, the 18th layer of hell reached an indescribable amount of time. Compared to it, the entire primordial world seemed to be eternal and unchanging. It exists forever. Although the great freedom heavenly demon master had entered the 18 layers of hell a few days earlier than Luo Qi, he had only been in the 18 layers of hell for a short period of time. It was already very rare for him to be able to form the darkness incarnation and use the darkness incarnation's innate magical power, the 18 layers of hell. How could he have comprehended it so much? To be able to change the flow of time hundreds to tens of thousands of times faster was already extremely difficult. Hence, he needed to use the illusion of punishment to make Luo Fan addicted, and he could not use the true punishment time of the 18 layers of hell to fight the enemy. Chapter 2:15. Chapter 2:15 of the Dhyada 100 years passed in the blink of an eye. Only time was the cruelest punishment in the 18 hells of hell. There were all sorts of obscure energies supporting the operation of the 18 levels of hell, and there were also tiny specks of light, heat, and energy that could absorb all light, all heat, and all energy. However, there were no conditions suitable for cultivators to cultivate here. Therefore, when a cultivator entered the 18 hells of hell, his power could only leak out continuously and be absorbed by the tiny specks that could absorb everything. It was impossible for him to cultivate, and it was impossible for his power to grow. Therefore, although the first hells of hell lasted 3,750 years, which was equivalent to a day in the primordial world, it was not suitable for cultivators to cultivate here. The longer a cultivator was placed in the 18 hells of hell, the more power would leak out, and the crueler the punishment would be. The 18 hells of hell set up by the great Freedom Demon Lord's dark incarnation was not perfect. The changes in time were not as natural and obscure as the real 18 hells of hell, and there were also many chisel marks. However, Luo Fan's eyes had the ability to change time and space in the primordial world. Through these chisel marks, he easily discovered the true mystery of the 18 hells of hell. The great Freedom Demon Lord did not respond to Luo Fan's words. He just raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. The 18 hells of hell around him instantly began to rotate rapidly. As the rotation continued, Luo Fan felt the flow of time around him change rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had reached 12,000 times the speed of the primordial world. He had arrived at the world that represented the 18 hells of hell, or rather, the part of the world. As he arrived, an indescribable suction force was generated from everywhere in the world, acting on all the power in Luo Fan's body. Be it his magic power, his physical strength, or even the power of his spirit, they were all being sucked away by this suction force. Luo Fan had long seen through the secret of the 18 hells of hell created by the dark incarnation, so the change in this level was still within his expectations. Therefore, he was not surprised, nor did he panic at all. With just a thought, the magic power in his body suddenly contracted and condensed. The ethereal fruit of the earthly immortal way that condensed in his lower abdomen became even more condensed and harder to move. As the earthly immortal Tao fruit condensed, his dermic powers, his soul and his physical strength seemed to be attached to some sort of unshakable existence, becoming incomparably stable. No matter how strong the mysterious suction force was, it couldn't affect his power at all. It couldn't extract any of his power at all. With a wave of his hand, Luo Fan's earthly immortal Tao fruit vibrated slightly, and the gold and silver light in his eyes flashed even faster. In the blink of an eye, an incomparably stable path formed in front of him. This path twisted and turned, forming an incomparably profound path in the void that seemed to contain infinite mysteries and mysteries, connecting to the incarnation of darkness in the center of this world. Although there were countless twists and turns on this path, it seemed to be closer to the great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord's darkness incarnation. The great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord finally showed a look of surprise. It's only been a short period of time in the untainted land, but your cultivation realm has already improved so much. It seems that it is indeed not the right time to occupy the untainted land. My choice to retreat is the right one." He uttered these majestic words. At this moment, Luo Fan had already stepped onto the path, walking several kilometers with each step towards the incarnation of darkness. The 18 levels of hell that surrounded Luo Fan was, after all, the Dark Demon Lord's innate magic. With Luo Fan's ability, if he were in other spaces or even the real 18 levels of hell, he would be able to cross tens of thousands of kilometers with a single step. After all, he was affected here, and could only walk a few kilometers with each step with the help of his own feet. Hearing the incarnation of darkness's words, he smiled faintly and said, "The untainted land contains endless mysteries, and there are countless people whose cultivation realm is no lower than mine. You want to occupy the untainted land? Demon Lord, you really overestimate yourself." As he spoke, Luo Fan had already walked tens of thousands of kilometers and arrived in front of the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord's incarnation of darkness. He raised his right hand and pressed it down on the incarnation of darkness. A faint smile appeared on the incarnation's face as he said, "Overestimate yourself. Let's not talk about how many living beings at your cultivation realm are in the untainted land. The flow of time in the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord is millions of times faster than that in the untainted land. With such a huge amount of time, there are millions of experts in the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord who are slightly weaker than me. How can the untainted land, which has only been established for less than 3 periods, withstand the invasion of such a force? The untainted land is gone. In less than 40,000 years, I will be able to build a stable path and transfer the countless living beings in the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord into the untainted land. By then, the entire untainted land will be mine. Let's meet again in 40,000 years." Although he spoke very slowly and every word was extremely clear, they were all transmitted into Luo Fan's ears in the short moment that Luo Fan's hand came down. Even the disdainful tone was clearly heard by Luo Fan. The changes were extremely mysterious and unpredictable. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. From the great boundless heavenly demon master's mouth, he finally learned a bit of the secrets of his boundless transformation heaven. The flow of time in the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord was faster than that in the untainted land, and Luo Fan already knew this. However, the speed of the flow was actually this fast, which was beyond his expectations. If the flow of time in the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord was really thousands of times faster than that of the untainted land, then the history of the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord would be billions of years long, even though the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord had only been created 2 yuan hui. Under such circumstances, even if the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord was a few levels lower than the untainted land, and even if the highest level of cultivators it could produce was only at the level of the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord, the number of high-level cultivators would reach an unimaginable level under the accumulation of time. If it was really as he said, that there were hundreds of millions of experts, then no matter how big the untainted land was, no matter how many innate gods it contained, it would not be able to withstand the invasion of such a huge number of experts. As countless thoughts flashed through his mind, Luo Fan's right hand had already covered the head of the Great Freedom Heavenly Demon Lord's dark incarnation. The movement of this barrier was smooth like flowing water, and it drew out a profound and unfathomable trajectory. Moreover, it even contained the deepest profundities of the martial scripture of the Tao Fruit's Grand Tao Scripture, so it was utterly impossible to dodge or resist. After being covered by this hand, the dark incarnation's body collapsed without any delay. At the same time, countless huge cracks appeared in the world that was a simulation of the untainted land's 18 levels of hell. The cracks rapidly expanded, and the whole world almost collapsed in an instant. The whole process was unimaginably fast. From the moment Luo Fan's right hand covered the great freedom heavenly demon lord's dark incarnation to the moment the whole world collapsed and the surroundings returned to darkness, returning to the 18 levels of hell, only a split second had passed. During this process, even when the body was crushed and the 18 levels of hell completely collapsed, the dark incarnation still looked at Luo Fan with a faint smile, as if he was looking at a dead man. Luo Fan raised his hand and pressed down lightly. The shock wave caused by the collapse of the world and the collapse of the great freedom heavenly demon lord's dark incarnation, as well as the countless tiny existences, disappeared into thin air. I didn't expect to fall for it. It's been 100 years. Luo Fan let out a long sigh. It had been 100 years since he entered the 18 levels of hell of the great freedom heavenly demon lord's dark incarnation. Most of the 100 years had been spent in the process of entering the 18 levels of hell. Although the process seemed to only take an instant, it had in fact taken nearly 100 years. During the 100 years, the great freedom heavenly demon lord's true body had already escaped to God knows where. In a situation where the enemy was in the light and he was in the dark, it was almost impossible to find the great freedom heavenly demon lord's true body. Sighing inwardly, Luo Fan did not intend to give up and continue the process. Although he knew that the great freedom heavenly demon lord had left through various means and it would be difficult for him to find him again, since he was already here, Luo Fan could not help but feel unwilling to not see what was beneath the 18 levels of hell. After fighting with the great freedom heavenly demon lord's dark incarnation for 100 years, although Luo Fan had been tricked, he had also gained a general understanding of the 18 levels of hell through this battle. He lifted his foot and took 17 steps forward, and then he came to another space that was completely different from the previous one. In this place, apart from a faint blood-red light that was infinitely far below, there was only boundless darkness. Even the small dots that filled the darkness and could absorb all light, all heat, and all energy were unprecedentedly calm, and their activity had become unprecedentedly weak. The feeling of calmness, as if one had returned to the beginning of the world, as if one had arrived at the end of the world, was so strong that it was almost tangible. Even Luo Fan himself was affected, and felt that his thinking was not working well. Luo Fan was not surprised by this change. This was because this was the deepest level of the 18 levels of hell. In other words, this was the 18 levels of hell of the untainted world. Here, the speed of the flow of time had reached a state that could not be described with numbers. At this moment, even the spirit space inside the Wuji Palace seemed to have completely stopped time. Regardless of any living creatures, the movement of the grass in the wind, or the flight of the orioles, everything seemed to have stopped in all kinds of strange states. The speed of the flow of time in the spirit space was 730 times that in the untainted world. Chapter 216. Chapter 216 of WAR Comprehending the Mystery and Refining the Incarnation. The speed of time in the spirit space was not fixed at 730 times the speed of the untainted world. In fact, the speed of time in the spirit space was a relative speed. Its speed was relative to the space-time of the void Wuji Palace. That was to say, the speed of time in the spirit space should be 730 times that of the 18th layer of hell. However, this was only possible under the condition of slow time flow. For example, in the 18th layer of hell, the time flow was already billions of times faster than that of the untainted world, which had far exceeded the bearing capacity of the spirit space. Luo Fan carefully comprehended the minor kiliacosm inside the limitless palace. Through the performance of the minor kiliacosm, he had a deeper understanding of the mysteries of space-time. He even felt that the space-time distortion ability of his great sun golden eyes and bright moon silver eyes had strengthened a little. His mind left the spirit space and carefully comprehended the strange aura of the 18th layer of hell, which was like the beginning of the world and the end of the world. Luo Fan gradually understood the essence of the 18 layers of hell. As he understood this point, He suddenly felt that the tiny dots around him became extremely intimate. It seemed that he could control these tiny dots to form some kind of extremely powerful thing. Dark incarnation. With this intimate feeling, Luo Fan already knew where this feeling came from in the blink of an eye. He couldn't help murmuring. As he said this, all the tiny existences within a radius of thousands of feet around his body continued to gather and gradually condensed into a ball in front of him. Furthermore, it was constantly undergoing some sort of mysterious, indescribably wondrous compression, condensation, and transformation. After a while, he had already turned into a middle-aged man wearing a dark blue robe. He had a dignified face, and his appearance was somewhat similar to Luo Fan's. However, he contained a kind of tranquil aura that seemed to devour everything, and also seemed to contain everything. After the middle-aged man appeared, Luo Fan suddenly felt that he seemed to have a very strange body. At the same time, a vague feeling of controlling the entire 18 layers of hell appeared in his heart. As soon as this feeling appeared, Luo Fan instantly knew that this middle-aged man in front of him was one of his incarnations, a dark incarnation with the same characteristics as the great Freedom Demon Master's dark incarnation. Although the appearance of this incarnation was completely different from the great Freedom Demon Lord's incarnation of darkness, and even the aura it exuded was very different, the essence of the two was the same. They were both living beings condensed from the infinite darkness of the 18 levels of hell. They were born with the ability to control the 18 levels of hell, and they were born with all kinds of unfathomable abilities. With a thought, Luo Fan's body shook. Then he turned into a ray of light and rushed toward the middle-aged man in a dark cyan robe. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the middle-aged man's glabella, and then entered his sea of consciousness world through some mysterious mechanism. Naturally, there was a huge difference between the dark incarnation's sea of consciousness and Luo Fan's. The entire sea of consciousness world was extremely deep and dark, as if there was a vortex that swallowed everything or a huge black hole. After entering the sea of consciousness world, Luo Fan did not stop. He directly rushed to the center of the black hole, sat cross-legged in the void, and closed his eyes. His mind was like his spirit in the sea of consciousness world, spreading out and instantly controlling the entire sea of consciousness world, and then the entire dark incarnation. In an instant, he seemed to have become the supreme god of the entire 18 levels of hell, and the endless small existences around him were like his people under his feet. The feeling of controlling the entire 18 levels of hell was more than 10 times more real than before. As long as he moved his mind, all the small existences within a radius of 10,000 miles would change according to his will, changing into tens of thousands of unimaginable mysterious structures. This incarnation is really amazing, and it's almost omnipotent in the 18 levels of hell. The vast heavenly demon master actually only developed such an innate magic, what a waste! Luo Fan carefully observed the power of the dark incarnation and could not help but sigh in his heart. With a slight thought, 18 halos that emitted 18 different kinds of light appeared behind his head. These 18 halos were constantly changing. The outermost layer would suddenly become the innermost layer, and the innermost layer would suddenly become the second outermost layer, and so on and so forth. They were constantly changing, flickering, and changing. They seemed to be evolving the infinite space-time Great Tao, and had unimaginable power. This was Luo Fan's version of the 18 levels of hell. It seemed that there was a huge difference between the real 18 levels of hell and the magic power that the vast heavenly demon master had evolved. They seemed to be two completely different magic powers, and there was almost no connection between them. However, in fact, the power of Luo Fan's version of the 18 levels of hell was more powerful, and its essence was more in line with the 18 levels of hell. Moreover, because of the existence of the halos, it seemed more flexible, more varied, and more powerful. Each of the 18 halos was a world, and each represented a level of hell. If an enemy was sucked into the halos, they would continuously sink in the rotation of the worlds, and finally completely sink in the endless time of the 18 levels of hell. In the end, their power would completely dissipate, and their souls would collapse. Thus, the effect of destroying the enemy was achieved. It was a pity that this magic power was born with the Dark Incarnation. Even with Luo Fan's cultivation realm, if he used this magic power on his own body, the power would probably be far less than 1/10,000th of the Dark Incarnation's power. It could be said that it was quite limited. With a slight thought, a piece of fire attribute chaotic origin essence that was 300 meters in diameter flew out of his sleeve and floated in front of him. Just as the countless tiny existences in the surroundings were about to pounce on the fire attribute chaotic origin essence to extract its power, the 18 halos behind the Dark Incarnation's head quickly shook, and the fire attribute chaotic origin essence was sucked into the halos. As the fire attribute chaotic origin essence entered, Luo Fan's consciousness also entered the halos, moving along with the fire attribute chaotic origin essence. He carefully observed the process of the changes in the 18 worlds that the fire attribute chaotic origin essence had opened up in the halos. He watched this huge piece of primordial essence move from world to world, watched its energy being extracted, and watched its materials being devoured. Half a day had passed in the outside world, but this fire attribute chaotic origin essence seemed to have gone through tens of thousands of years. At a certain moment, Luo Fan's heart moved, and the halos behind his head shook again. Then, a fist-sized rock was spat out from the halos and floated in front of the Dark Incarnation. This was the remnant of the fire attribute chaotic origin essence after its power was extracted by the 18 levels of hell. This was a rock that even the 18 levels of hell couldn't erode. This rock didn't contain any energy, and its material composition was extremely pure. It was an extremely sturdy material that repelled all energy and was incompatible with any material. When this rock appeared, the incomparably dense tiny existences in the 18 levels of hell swarmed over and instantly drowned the rock. They frantically attacked the rock and produced an extremely strong suction force, trying their best to extract all the energy in this rock and corrode everything that could be corroded. However, after a long while, there was still no change to the rock. It was still as complete as before, and still as stable as before. Luo Fan's eyes lit up. This rock wasn't compatible with any energy, and its material composition was too stable, so it couldn't be refined into a Dharma treasure or even a Dharma artifact. However, this characteristic of the 18 levels of hell that couldn't erode it made it an extremely rare treasure. Could be said that the most precious thing in the entire Martian chaotic origin essence was this rock. Although he still didn't know what use this rock had, he raised his hand and put this precious rock into his universe in his sleeve. With a thought from Luo Fan, the Darkness Incarnation raised its hand and grabbed at the air. A black divine dragon that was tens of thousands of feet long formed in the void. Although this black divine dragon was formed from the endless tiny existences in this hell, its body was as solid as real flesh and blood. The scales on its body were all the same, and the distribution of the scales contained some kind of mysterious mystery. The entire divine dragon was extremely mighty, and the light in its eyes was clear, revealing a kind of indescribable agility. Obviously, it had a rather complete spiritual sense. The moment the divine dragon formed, it let out an incomparably majestic dragon roar. Its voice spread far and wide, causing the entire dark hell to tremble. The tiny existences that were originally very evenly distributed distanced themselves from the black divine dragon's body as if they had met their natural enemy. They gave up an empty space with a radius of nearly 1,000 feet around the black divine dragon's body. After the divine dragon let out a dragon roar, it suddenly lifted its head and used its head to support the Darkness Incarnation's legs. With a swing of its body, it carried Luo Fan's Darkness Incarnation and swam in the direction where the faint blood-colored light was coming from. The black divine dragon swam at an extremely fast speed. The way it swam was even more mysterious. It drew an incomparably mysterious trajectory in midair, and in the blink of an eye, it had already arrived at the source of the blood-colored light. Here, the all-encompassing blood-colored light dispelled the incomparably deep darkness of the 18 levels of hell. Chapter 217. Space-Time Seal, boundless sea of blood. After arriving here, and seeing the scene below that was completely different from the 18 layers of hell, Luo Fan no longer had the idea of continuing to test the power of the Dark Incarnation. The body of the Dark Incarnation shook, and a mysterious light rushed out of the Niwen Palace between his eyebrows. Then it fell and condensed, and it had already turned into Luo Fan in a dark green robe. After Luo Fan's body appeared, he did not stop at all. He turned his hands slightly, looked at the void, and made a grasping motion. His mind moved slightly, and as the spiritual power in his body flowed, there were endless three-dimensional talismans flashing in the void. These three-dimensional talismans were tiny like specks of dust, and they covered the heavens and the earth. As soon as they appeared, they formed an extremely strange structure. It was like a giant hand, and it completely sealed the space in an area of 300,000 m around the Divine Black Dragon and the Divine Black Dragon. It formed a complete silken cocoon. Although the tiny existences that filled the 18 layers of hell could absorb all energy and all light, that was only for ordinary energy. For Luo Fan, who was familiar with the mysteries of the 18 layers of hell, it was not impossible to change the way the energy operated, so that these tiny light spots could not be absorbed or devoured. And the silk cocoon formed by these three-dimensional talismans was this kind of energy after the change. The endless tiny existences around constantly attacked the silk cocoon, constantly wearing down the three-dimensional talismans, but it did not produce the slightest effect. The silk cocoon formed by the tiny, dust-like three-dimensional talismans spun wildly, instantly cutting the spacetime, forming a huge spacetime seal, and it was shrinking at a very fast speed. As it shrank, the Dark Incarnation and the Black Divine Dragon in the sealed space gradually shrank, and they were constantly compressed. In the blink of an eye, the seal had turned into a fist-sized ball. Mysterious light flowed on it, as if there was a complete world contained in it. A silver light flashed in Luo Fan's right eye, and the time and space in front of him distorted. The small black ball in front of him charged straight into his left pupil, instantly dyeing the silver pupil of his left eye black. This seal was a kind of spacetime seal that sealed the spacetime. What it sealed was the space within 100,000 feet of the 18th layer of hell. The Dark Incarnation, however, needed the environment of hell to complement it in order to unleash its ultimate power. If he had time in the future, Luo Fan would be able to refine this sealed spacetime and turn it into an auxiliary magic tool. When he unfolded it, he would be able to simulate the environment of the 18th layer of hell, allowing the Dark Incarnation to push its power to its peak even in the outside world. But that would have to be in the future. Right now, Luo Fan could only rely on the bright moon silver pupil's ability to distort time and space to suppress the seal and maintain the integrity of the seal. Only then would the seal not collapse due to the change in time and space within it. Thus, he sealed it into his bright moon silver pupil. After sealing this spacetime seal in his right eye, Luo Fan instantly felt that his bright moon silver pupil had been completely sealed. When he used it, it no longer had the power it had before. Knowing that this was the state that happened when the power of the bright moon silver pupil was used to suppress the spacetime seal, Luo Fan was not surprised. Instead, he raised his hand and pointed at his left eye. A layer of black fog appeared in his left eye and instantly sealed his great sun golden pupil. Without the bright moon silver pupil, the power of the great sun golden pupil was greatly reduced. It was better to take this opportunity to seal his eyes and reduce his reliance on them. After doing all of this, Luo Fan's eyes spun, and he no longer had the feeling of seeing through everything. However, the feeling of seeing through the surface allowed him to feel another kind of comprehension that was different from seeing through everything. After a long time, Luo Fan turned his attention to the endless blood-red light in front of him. This blood-red light was emitted by a boundless sea of blood. This sea of blood covered the sky and covered the earth. It was incomparably wide and covered all directions. The blood-red light that it emitted was tough and condensed. It contained an extremely profound mystery and was unbreakable. Even the tiny existences that filled the 18 levels of hell could not break the integrity of this blood-red light. They could not absorb even a trace of the blood-red light. Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed the air. Within a radius of several feet, strands of blood-red light condensed and appeared in his hand. Although this blood-red light was only an illusion, but for a cultivator of Luo Fan's level of cultivation, the difference between illusion and reality was already extremely small. It was normal for him to grasp this kind of incorporeal body as if it were real. Carefully caressing this seemingly real but actually illusory blood-red light, a feeling similar to touching jelly appeared in his heart. He almost had an impulse to not let go of it. This blood-red light was extremely condensed, just like real blood. However, it did not have any stench or filth. It was like an extremely pure blood jade, crystal clear. Light flowed in it, as if there were countless kinds of faint light and shadows flashing in it. Raising his hand to disperse this trace of blood-red light, Luo Fan took a step and came to the surface of the sea of blood. As he entered the area covered by the blood-red light, the moment he left the incomparably deep darkness of the 18 levels of hell, Luo Fan felt that he had broken through the original time and space and arrived at a completely different time and space. His mind, which was originally sluggish, returned to its original state of incomparably fast and lightning-like speed. With a thought, his mind went deep into the world of his sea of consciousness. Through the void of the Wuji Palace beside his spine, he sensed the spirit space. In an instant, he found that the flow of time in the spirit space had returned to the previous state. The whole process no longer felt that time was stagnant. The wind blew the grass grew, and the birds flew. Everything was extremely smooth. As soon as Luo Fan saw this, he knew that he had stepped out of the 18 levels of hell. And here was probably the end of the untainted land, the place that corresponded to the endless starry sky above the untainted land. He sent out his perception to incorporate the sea of blood into his mind. In an instant, a feeling similar to that of being under the endless starry sky came into his heart. The boundless sea of blood below was like the endless starry sky above the untainted land. No matter how he magnified or reduced his perception, he could see the end of the sea of blood. But no matter how he enhanced his perception, he could not perceive the scene outside the end of the sea of blood. This feeling was so similar to the feeling when facing the endless starry sky. Dispelling the sigh in his heart, Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed in the air. In the sea of blood below, a large mass of blood with a diameter of 100 feet floated up. In the blink of an eye, it had already arrived in front of him. Taking a closer look, Luo Fan was slightly shocked. He saw that the blood was clear and pure, like a piece of top-grade blood jade. However, there were countless tiny shadows constantly flashing within it. These shadows contained countless sceneries, including endless mountains and rivers, deserts and swamps, as well as all kinds of beasts hunting prey, all kinds of plants growing, and all kinds of life forms feeding each other. There were all kinds of changes, and it was all-encompassing. It was as if this pool of blood contained a complete world, an endless heaven and earth, and an endless life force. Luo Fan raised his hand and gently wiped it. This mass of blood water with a diameter of 100 feet constantly twisted and changed, forming one mysterious and wonderful shape after another. After a long while, after experimenting with hundreds of thousands of forms, Luo Fan finally let out a long breath. He raised his hand and scattered the large mass of blood, turning it into countless water droplets that poured down like rain, returning to the sea of blood. Through the experiment just now and his powerful senses, he had already understood the mysteries of the structure of the sea of blood. The sea of blood contained all the heavy, turbid, and energy in the entire chaos world. The entire sea of blood seemed to be formed from endless blood, but in reality, it was only formed from the condensed essence of countless heavy, turbid, and negative energies. The seemingly clear, pure, and even somewhat resplendent blood jade was actually formed from the condensation of countless types of energy. The heterogeneity within it had reached a limit. If one were to seriously divide it, there were probably hundreds of millions of types of energy within it. It was precisely because its structure was so complicated that it could evolve such complicated shadows under the special rules of the sea of blood. After he understood all of this, Luo Fan knew that if he stepped into the depths of the sea of blood, he would enter an illusion that possessed a boundless world, and he would transform into one of the shadows within the boundless shadows within the sea of blood. Only when he completely comprehended the various energies within the sea of blood and comprehended the profundities of these illusions would he be able to escape. These shadows, these worlds, were like the endless stars within the endless starry sky. They were endless in number and contained endless mysteries. After understanding this, Luo Fan also understood why the vast heavenly Devil Lord wanted to come to the sea of blood. This was definitely a treasured place to cultivate the illusory Tao. The endless shadows within the sea of blood seemed illusory yet real, but they contained endless mysteries of the illusion. If the vast heavenly Devil Lord came here to comprehend these shadows, his cultivation would definitely improve several times faster than before. Thinking of this, Luo Fan's mood was rather heavy. Although he had pursued the vast heavenly Devil Lord so closely that he could only change his position and leave the sea of blood, the sea of blood was distributed under the entire chaos world. As long as he kept going down, he would be able to enter the sea of blood in the end. If the vast heavenly Devil Lord did not give up on entering the sea of blood to comprehend its mysteries, he would have countless opportunities to enter the sea of blood in the next 30,000 years. Even if he waited here at all times, it would be impossible for him to guard against it. What should I do? Luo Fan frowned. He was in a dilemma. After a long time, he sighed and said softly, forget it. Since I can't stop him from comprehending the sea of blood, I'll first thoroughly comprehend the sea of blood. As long as my comprehension of the sea of blood is stronger than the vast heavenly Devil Lord's, I'll never have to fear his comprehension of the sea of blood. After saying that, he did not hesitate at all. Chapter 218. Turning false into true, boundless universe. Luo Fan's figure slammed into the sea of blood, and instantly felt as if he had broken through some unfathomable barrier. In the blink of an eye, he had already arrived at a whole new world. It was a world that seemed illusory yet real, filled with a faint blood-red light. There was no end to it, and there was nothing but nothingness in all directions. After arriving in this world, Luo Fan's body instantly underwent some very strange changes. This change was not small, and could even be said to be earth-shattering. If it was normal, it should have been very easy for Luo Fan to detect it. However, the strangeness of this change was that after a dozen breaths of time, Luo Fan actually discovered that his body had undergone a change. How can this be? My body has returned to the body of an ordinary person on Earth in my previous life. Luo Fan was shocked. Although it was not to the extent of being horrified, it was difficult for him to remain calm. This body Luo Fan was too familiar with. Although he had lost this body tens of thousands of years ago, the familiarity that was engraved in the depths of his soul was still something that he could not ignore. This was the body that he had watched grow up on Earth. It was precisely because of this familiarity with the body that he had watched grow up and used for more than 20 years that he almost instinctively felt that this body was his, and did not think in the direction that his body had changed. It was also because of this that he discovered the fact that his body had changed after a while. As Luo Fan felt the changes in his body, The world around him that was filled with a faint blood-red light suddenly underwent an earth-shattering change. In the blink of an eye, a large piece of land was laid out under his feet, and countless tall buildings rose from the ground. Countless fashionably dressed men and women appeared between the tall buildings in the blink of an eye, and all kinds of vehicles suddenly appeared out of thin air on the main road. An extremely noisy and complicated city scene appeared in front of him in the blink of an eye. In the sky above his head, the wind and clouds moved, and the sun emitted a scorching heat and dazzling light that illuminated the earth. The hustle and bustle of voices poured into Luo Fan's ears from all directions. An incomparably familiar and nostalgic feeling appeared in his heart. This was the boundless blood sea. This was something that Luo Fan was still extremely certain of. He did not feel that his thoughts were being distorted or his memories were being deceived. However, this entire world was exactly the same as the world he had lived in for the first 20 years of his life. Whether it was the gravity, the air, the buildings, the aura, the population, and so on, they were all remarkably similar to Earth. And this was obviously impossible. Motherf *Ker, even if you want to die, don't harm me. At this moment, a sudden breaking sound was heard, followed by an exasperated shout that poured into Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan looked back and saw a truck parked horizontally behind him. A bald, strong man with a fierce face was shouting at Luo Fan in exasperation. His heart skipped a beat, and only then did he realize that he was actually standing in the middle of the road in a daze. Although he understood the man's feelings, it did not mean that he was willing to endure the man's shouts. Therefore, he frowned and his eyes narrowed. Right now, although he only had the body of an ordinary person, his memory was not distorted or affected. Naturally, his cultivation level was not affected. Therefore, as soon as his expression changed, an extremely strong will appeared out of thin air and directly acted on the bald man's body. The bald, strong man felt the pressure of this will, and an incomparably deep despair suddenly appeared in the deepest part of his heart. It was as if the entire world was pressing down on him, as if he could turn into minced meat in the next moment. Cold sweat instantly soaked his clothes, and his face paled as his body trembled. Luo Fan naturally would not argue with this strong man too much. After teaching him a little lesson, he walked away. He was far too curious about this world, and right now it was more important to understand the mysteries of this world. This world was definitely not real, but he couldn't see any signs of it being fake. Even the strong man just now, even though he was under the pressure of his will, had a reaction that a normal person should have. It was as if he was a normal person with a complete spiritual consciousness. However, it was completely different from any illusion that Luo Fan knew of. Looking at the characteristics of the buildings on the side of the road, Luo Fan already knew that this city was the one he was most familiar with. However, he had never been to this place before. In other words, this place was not any place in his memory. This place was not the light and shadow that he had moved out from his memory. This world, what kind of secrets does it have? Sensing this, Luo Fan's expression became even more thoughtful. He did not use any special methods to increase his speed, although his body was only that of a normal person. As long as he was willing, there were countless ways for him to move a few miles in one step. He walked slowly on the side of the road, exerting his 5 senses to the limit. He absorbed all kinds of sounds, sights, smells, tactile sensations that were far beyond the range of a normal person's perception. These senses did not exceed the limits of a normal person's perception. The reason why he could have senses that were 10 times better than a normal person's was because he had isolated all kinds of noises that could blind a normal person's senses. Through these senses, Luo Fan carefully analyzed the truth of this world. The more he analyzed, the more he was in awe. At this moment, he was already convinced that this world was a similar world to reality. It was a world that was built on an illusion, but it was completely built according to the rules of reality, according to the composition of the real world. If one ignored its essence and only looked at everything in this world, and only looked at every living thing in this world, one would feel that this world was absolutely real. Every single person he met had a complete spiritual sense and had their own emotions, turning illusion into reality. If I can understand the mystery, it will definitely improve my illusory cultivation. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. The illusory way was the essence of the illusory array volume in the Tao Fruit scripture. Its improvement could not only allow Luo Fan to have the ability to restrain the vast freedom Devil Master, but it also had countless benefits for the improvement of his own cultivation realm. The endless light and shadows in the boundless sea of blood were the manifestation of the sea of blood's innate ability to develop infinite mysteries. The reason why there were endless and intermittent light and shadows was because there was no soul sense to guide them, or rather, there was no structural template. It was precisely because there was no template that the boundless sea of blood could only rely on the mysterious connection between it and the primordial world to continuously absorb the spiritual senses emitted by the countless living beings in the primordial world. It sought their memories and used their worldview to build such a world that turned the fake into the real. The untainted world had been established for less than 3 yuan hui. Among them, there were countless connate gods with complete soul sense born everywhere in the untainted world. However, even the strongest of these connate gods was only at the level of Tao Fruit like Luo Fan. With such a cultivation realm, compared to the boundless and unfathomable untainted world, he was as small as an ant. Not to mention that most connate gods were muddle-headed. They only knew how to instinctively absorb the chaos essence chi to strengthen themselves and improve their soul sense. Therefore, in the untainted world, other than Luo Fan, the connate gods who had the deepest understanding of the world only knew the world within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles around them. This kind of knowledge was not enough for them to build a complete worldview. The boundless sea of blood sought their memories and used the knowledge of these connate gods to build this world that turned illusion into reality. Naturally, it could only obtain fragment. However, Luo Fan was different. Not to mention that in this life, Luo Fan had consciously searched for the mysteries of the untainted world and had a rough understanding of the structure of the untainted world. In his previous life, when he was an ordinary person, Earth was in an era of information explosion. Even if he did not consciously study it, it was enough for him to have an extremely clear understanding of the Earth that he lived on and the universe that Earth was in through occasional unintentional understanding. Earth, the 9 planets of the solar system, the billions of stars in the Milky Way, and the billions of extragalactic systems. The world built by such a complete system was the limit of what the boundless sea of blood could evolve. Luo Fan threw himself into the boundless sea of blood alone, which was equivalent to opening up his memories for the sea of blood to seek. Under the effect of some mysterious rules, the sea of blood would work hard to build the world that turned illusion into reality according to the most complete worldview that it could obtain. In the end, it chose Luo Fan's worldview. Luo Fan looked up at the sky. With the help of his cultivation realm at the peak of the earth immortal Tao Fruit, his gaze pierced through the blue sky and saw the starry sky outside the sun in the blink of an eye. In the pitch-black sky, stars appeared one after another in the vast expanse of nothingness. These stars gradually formed all kinds of unfathomable and mysterious patterns. They seemed to have no rules and were just random decorations, but also seemed to be evolving some kind of profound mystery. As soon as Luo Fan saw it, he knew that this was the appearance of the world that was evolving. Although he did not know the true mystery of the Sea of Blood, through these appearances, Luo Fan also knew that this world that turned illusion into reality was rapidly becoming complete. Feeling this, a faint uneasiness surfaced in his heart. It seems that I should speed up. If this continues, it will be troublesome to leave this world when this world is completely complete. Luo Fan thought to himself. Chapter 219. Revisit family ties, blood light turns into stars. Although there were countless things in this world that were not in Luo Fan's memories, this world, this universe, after all, had been developed from his worldview by the boundless sea of blood. Therefore, in this world, he would definitely be able to find many things that he was familiar with, for example, his family, friends, and the environment he had lived in. If Luo Fan wanted to understand the truth of this world and understand the mysteries of the evolution of this world, the best way was to compare the things he was familiar with these things that he didn't have in his memory, and understand through the differences between them. And with that faint uneasiness in his heart, Luo Fan was no longer in the mood to continue walking leisurely. With a thought, under the control of his superb cultivation realm, an incomparably powerful will was emitted from his body, directly affecting the void around him. The void had a limit to the amount of power it could withstand. Under the effect of his will, it produced a strong distortion, and in a trance, his figure disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in the district that he was most familiar with, in front of the door that he was most familiar with in the district. "Little Fan, you're back. Wash your hands and eat." As soon as he opened the door, he saw his mother coming up to him, speaking in a very familiar and very nostalgic voice. Luo Fan's heart trembled. How long had it been since he had heard this familiar care? Was it 100,000 years, or 1,000,000 years? Even though his heart was extremely tough, even though he knew that these things in front of him were only natural evolutions of the boundless sea of blood, and not the same things in his memories, even though he knew that this mother before him was not the mother in his memories, he could not help but feel a sourness in his heart. "Mother!" His mouth moved, and Luo Fan finally called out. Wasn't his life's pursuit, his constant pursuit of the great Tao, all so that he could see his family again one day? Wasn't it all for the sake of hearing this sentence from his mother? At this moment, the scene of his dreams appeared in front of him. Even though he knew that it was all fake, he could not help but want to relive this feeling. "What are you spacing out for? Wash your hands and eat." His mother gently scolded him with a smile. What happened next was very natural. His father, brother, and girlfriend returned one after another. After the family had a joyful meal, Luo Fan knew that if he continued to indulge in it, he would really sink into it. He could only sigh and ignore his lover's persuasion. With a turn of his body, he disappeared from these seemingly real and fake relatives. When he reappeared, he had already arrived at a place that he had seen many times from afar, but had never actually been to. No matter who it was, there were many places like this, moving from familiarity to unfamiliarity, moving from things in one's memory to things outside of one's memory. This was more beneficial and easier for one to comprehend the mysteries of this world. Looking up at the sky, Luo Fan felt slightly relieved when he saw the endless stars that were constantly evolving in the pitch-black void of the universe through the sky that was covered by the sunlight. The speed at which the boundless sea of blood evolved into a world was extremely fast. Even the evolution of the entire Earth was completed in less than a breath's time. However, in Luo Fan's worldview, the universe was just too vast. Every star in the sky was surrounded by several or even dozens of planets. These were several or even dozens of worlds. Even a barren and lifeless planet was still a world, just a barren world. There were billions of trillions of stars in the void of the universe. Even if a planet or a world could evolve in an instant, it would still take a very long time to complete the evolution of the entire universe. In fact, the delay of a meal's time did not affect the evolution of the entire universe at all. Knowing that there was still a lot of time, Luo Fan calmed his mind and carefully examined the process of the things that he was familiar with turning into something that he was unfamiliar with. Although his 5 senses were only at the level of an ordinary person, under the control of his superb cultivation realm, these ordinary senses could unleash superhuman effects, allowing him to receive information that far surpassed that of an ordinary person. The things that Luo Fan was familiar with were directly moved out from his memory. He was absolutely certain of this. However, the things that he was unfamiliar with, or even things that did not exist in his memory, were evolved from the boundless sea of blood according to the worldview in Luo Fan's memory. Through this natural evolution in his memory, he could naturally understand the mystery of how the boundless sea of blood evolved into the universe, and he could also comprehend the mysteries of the boundless sea of blood. An incomparably deep light flashed in his eyes. All sorts of information that Luo Fan's 5 senses received flowed into his mind. The appearances of those things were gradually stripped away by him. The various illusions that covered up the truth were also becoming less and less. Luo Fan's figure did not move at all. He stood there quietly. As the days and years passed, the surrounding environment gradually changed. The mortals, buildings, and objects gradually changed. An ordinary person stood by the side of the road, motionless like a statue, but his eyes shone brightly, displaying a state of mind that surpassed that of an ordinary person. This did not attract attention at first, but as time passed, it naturally attracted the attention of others. As a result, more and more people gathered. There were even doctors, police, and even people from the special task force. However, no one could move Luo Fan's figure, and no one could affect Luo Fan. At this time, Luo Fan wanted to exhaust the mysteries of this world, but he treated everything as nothingness. The various people who came to deal with him because he stood there motionless were compared with the knowledge in his memory. Through this difference, he saw the essence of this world clearly. Day after day, month after month, year after year, as time passed, he gradually felt that he was getting closer and closer to the essence of this world. One day after 36 years, Luo Fan's mind suddenly moved, and an indescribable understanding emerged in his heart. Then, his body, which was as thin as a skeleton, suddenly changed. The body of an ordinary person in his previous life had turned into the innate Taoism body that he had cultivated in the blink of an eye. The magic power in his body, his super-perception, his soul, his sea of consciousness, and all kinds of magic treasures all returned in an instant. In the blink of an eye, he regained everything he had cultivated after coming to the untainted world. As his magic power recovered, his body shook, and his figure rose at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, he had already left Earth, turned into a long rainbow, and rushed straight into the depths of the distant universe. In this cosmic void, the flying speed of the long rainbow, he had incarnated far exceeded the speed of flying in the untainted world. It was even faster than the speed of moving the void in the spirit kiliacosm. In the universe, he left an afterimage that was tens of thousands of miles long. In the blink of an eye, he had already left the solar system. The afterimage that was created because of his excessive speed extended straight out, and its target was the countless stars that were constantly evolving and forming in the depths of the universe. He had spent 36 years on Earth, and he had gradually approached the essence of this world. But he was only close. If he wanted to truly understand the mysteries of the evolution of this world, he had to personally go to the front line of the evolution of the world and understand the specific process of the evolution of the stars. After his magic power recovered, Luo Fan's perception and comprehension ability were many times stronger than before, and the things he understood were also many times more than when he had just entered this world. Although he had stood in that position for 36 years, and although the evolution of a star could be completely evolved in an instant, at this time, the countless stars in the entire universe were still evolving. Even the entire Milky Way had not yet completed its evolution. Therefore, if Luo Fan wanted to understand the specific process of formation and evolution, there were still countless opportunities. Although Luo Fan's flying speed was faster than the speed of moving the void, the boundless sea of blood's evolution speed was extremely terrifying after all. Therefore, it took him a full year to catch up to the position where the boundless sea of blood was evolving into a star. He finally saw the process of the stars being evolved from nothingness one after another. In the pitch-black and empty cosmic void, a spot of blood light suddenly appeared. Then, in almost a billionth of an instant, this spot of blood light turned into a star that emitted infinite light and heat. After another turn, several or even dozens of planets appeared around this star. And all kinds of things on those planets appeared almost at the same time. The entire process was very smooth. The process was short and unbelievably natural, and the process of its construction was extremely mysterious. It was as if these stars and planets had been directly moved from another world into this cosmic void. Luo Fan slowed down a little, and slowed down to the same speed as the boundless sea of blood's evolution of the stars. He unleashed his senses to the limit, and the evolution process of the stars was continuously included in his mind. The entire evolution process was too short, so short that Luo Fan could not sense all the changes in an instant. In order to understand its mysteries, he could only accumulate the evolution of countless stars, and use his understanding of the mysteries of the evolution of each star to make up for the evolution process. One after another, the evolution of the stars flowed through his mind. Gradually, Luo Fan entered a state where there was no one around him. The only thing he could see in his eyes was the ball of bloody light that was gently rotating. The endless mysteries contained in that rotation were gradually revealed in front of him. Chapter 220. True and false seamless, void shift. As he gradually completed the complicated changes contained in the blood-red light's gentle rotation, Luo Fan gradually discovered the incredible mystery contained in this rotation. He did not know the passage of time in the state of selflessness. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. On a certain day, 100 years after Luo Fan entered the state of selflessness, Luo Fan suddenly had an epiphany, as if he had woken up from the deepest part of his sleep. As this epiphany occurred, an indescribable feeling appeared in his mind. It was as if the evolving stars would collapse again with a single thought and return to the blood-red light. With this feeling, Luo Fan knew that he had understood the mystery of the rotation of the blood-red light. He moved his mind. As expected, as he moved, the rotation of the blood-red light that had appeared out of nowhere suddenly stopped. The evolving stars lost their chance to take shape and returned to the blood-red light. Success. I see. Luo Fan's heart was filled with boundless joy. After spending over 130 years, he had finally achieved something at this moment. The mystery of the boundless sea of blood evolving into a world had finally been lifted a little in front of him. With the first time, everything else naturally fell into place. With a thought from Luo Fan, the evolving stars that he had experienced over the past 100 years rapidly collapsed one after another. In the blink of an eye, they once again turned into balls of blood-red light. These balls of blood-red light floated in the pitch-black void of the universe and continuously gathered towards where Luo Fan was. At the same time, the pitch-black cosmic void also gradually collapsed, turning into a faint bloody light. It continued to gather and condense, attaching itself to the bloody light formed by the stars, piling up around Luo Fan's body. It was easy to destroy but difficult to create. It had been over 130 years since the beginning of the universe's appearance until now. At this point, it had only barely completed the evolution of the Milky Way. However, as the universe collapsed, the stars returned to the blood-red light, and the void returned to the sea of blood. As the universe collapsed, Luo Fan's figure arrived at the beginning of the universe's evolution, which was above the Earth that he was most familiar with. Less than a day had passed. When he returned to the sky above the Earth, the endless blood-red light formed by the stars had already covered the entire universe. The Earth that he was most familiar with was floating alone in the endless blood-red light. Standing in the remaining void, Luo Fan looked down at the various scenes that he was both familiar with and unfamiliar with. He let out a long sigh in his heart. Without any hesitation, he raised his hand and waved it gently. The Earth that he was extremely familiar with collapsed with a loud bang. In the blink of an eye, It had turned into a sparkling and translucent blood-red light. It merged into the endless blood-red light that covered the sky. As the blood-red light merged into the world, the entire world, and the entire blood-red sky instantly underwent an incomparably huge change. The blood-red light that formed the sky suddenly condensed and turned into endless blood-red water in the blink of an eye. It made Luo Fan's figure seem to be in the blood-red seawater. However, the blood-red seawater seemed especially pure, crystal clear, and translucent. It was like an extremely mysterious blood-red crystal. At this moment, the endless light that had been flashing in the blood-red water before Luo Fan entered had completely disappeared. Standing in the sea of blood, he carefully sensed it and discovered that there were countless strands of strange rule threads buried in an extremely deep and obscure location within the blood-red water. These rule threads had some kind of extremely mysterious and unfathomable connection with the entire primordial world. It seemed to be connected to the quintessence of the entire primordial world, and it contained the source of everything in the world. With a slight jolt of his heart, Luo Fan instantly knew that this was the true secret of the boundless sea of blood. It was the true source of the reason why the boundless sea of blood was able to condense all the and heavy and turbid energy of the primordial world here, and produce such an effect that could turn fake into real and evolve a world. If he could comprehend this secret, he would be able to create his own sea of blood and possess a world that could evolve at any time. He would be able to set up an illusion according to his opponent's memories and the weakness of his opponent's mind at any time. In the end, he would easily pull his opponent into the abyss of oblivion and defeat him easily. Unfortunately, the profundities involved were deep and complicated to an unimaginable extent. Even if Luo Fan, who had attained the peak of the earthly immortal Tao fruit, exhausted all his efforts, he would probably only be able to slightly sense that this secret existed within the blood-red water. He could only sense that this secret was not an illusion but was real. It was utterly impossible to truly comprehend the secret within it. Attaining the earthly immortal Tao fruit was a proof of one's life essence and a sublimation. Those that were able to attain the earthly immortal Tao fruit naturally knew where their limits were. So as soon as he sensed the existence of this secret, Luo Fan knew that this secret had already far exceeded the scope of his ability. If his attainments in the Tao didn't improve qualitatively, then even if he stayed within the sea of blood for tens of millions of years or 1,000,000,000,000 years, it would probably be difficult for him to comprehend a fraction of this secret. When he understood this, Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh in his heart. However, this sigh only continued for a short moment before it was lightly put down by him. Even though he didn't know the true secret of the sea of blood, he'd already obtained an extremely enormous gain from knowing the secret of the sea of blood turning fake into real and evolving a world, and he'd already achieved the goal of Luo Fan personally entering the sea of blood this time. Understanding this secret didn't just allow his grasp of the illusory formation scroll of the Tao fruits, Tao scripture, to practically improve qualitatively, it allowed him to not be deceived by any illusion that was lower than the illusory formation scroll of the Tao fruits, Tao scripture, and it even allowed him to obtain an unbelievable ability, an ability that was originally impossible for him to obtain at this cultivation realm. Void teleportation. In Luo Fan's previous understanding, no matter what method he used, he would need to use it on space to teleport. He would either tear space, distort space, or fold space, and so on. The stability and strength of the space of the primordial world had already reached the limit of Luo Fan's imagination. At that moment, Luo Fan had already cultivated to the peak of the earth immortal Tao fruit and already had the qualifications to seek the primordial unity Tao fruit. However, even if he used countless Dharma treasures to increase his strength, unleashed all his Dharma powers, and used the strongest mystical ability, he could at most distort the space of the primordial world slightly. The space-time in the endless starry sky and the 18 levels of hell had already changed. It was different from the primordial world. The stability of the space was far less than that of the primordial world. Therefore, it was possible to teleport. Therefore, with Luo Fan's current cultivation realm, it was just a delusion if he wanted to teleport in the primordial world. This time, after raising his illusory Tao cultivation to the realm of turning fake into real. However, Luo Fan discovered that there was another way to teleport. At that moment, Luo Fan's heart moved slightly. He raised his hand and waved it gently in front of him. In an instant, a very ordinary stone door that was only 15 feet tall and 10 feet wide appeared in front of him. This was a stone door that was created from the fake and had already turned fake into real. He raised his hand and pushed the stone door open. Without hesitation, he stepped in. As he stepped in, the stone door distorted and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. However, Luo Fan found that he had already arrived at the primordial world. However, in the blink of an eye, he had directly traversed thousands of miles of the 18 levels of hell and 90,000 miles of the ground. He had directly returned to the primordial world. Behind him, a stone door stood erect. Looking at its appearance, it was the stone door that he had built in the Blood Sea. As expected, after carefully examining it, Luo Fan knew that this was not an illusion, but the real primordial world. He was overjoyed. The previous changes seemed simple, but in fact, it contained all the insights that Luo Fan had gained in the boundless Blood Sea for more than 130 years. The complexity and profoundness of the changes contained within had already exhausted Luo Fan's mental strength. Just now, Luo Fan seemed to have constructed an ordinary stone door, but in fact, he had constructed an illusory world. A world that relied on the primordial world to exist. The stone door behind Luo Fan was constructed by Luo Fan in the illusory world. It was a passage that led to the real world. He stepped into the illusory world when he stepped through the stone door. When he stepped out of the stone door, he once again stepped into the real world. As a result, the transformation between real and fake produced an extremely mysterious effect. With the illusory world as a medium, he directly connected two places in the real world. With a thought, he turned around, and the stone door behind him closed out of thin air. He took a step forward, pushed the stone door open, and stepped into it. The stone door closed and disappeared without a trace, and Luo Fan's figure, in a breath's time, arrived at the top of Buzhou Mountain, which was billions of miles away from where he was. He arrived at the door of the cave abode. Stepping out of the door, he felt the extremely familiar aura, primordial qi, and pressure. Luo Fan could not help but feel that it was a lifetime ago. It was billions of miles away. Even with Luo Fan's speed in the Wuji Palace, he would probably need to fly for several days to cross the distance. But at this time, he actually spent less than a breath's time to cross this distance. This feeling really made people feel that it was an illusion. When the real is false, the false is true. When the false is true, the true is false. Nothing more, nothing more. Luo Fan let out a long sigh. It's a pity that it consumes too much power. In just a short time, it consumes nearly 10% of my power. It's really too extravagant. After sighing for a long time, Luo Fan frowned slightly. It was fine to use the illusory world as a medium to move the void for a short distance. But to reach the distance of billions of miles, the power consumed was simply so much that it made people feel cold. Roughly estimating, with Luo Fan's current cultivation, it would probably consume nearly 60% of his power to go from Buzhou Mountain to where Hongjun was. Chapter 221. Heaven Watcher overseeing the wilderness during this trip to the Yellow Springs, Luo Fan's harvest was quite considerable. It had far exceeded his own expectations. Not only did he have a rough idea of what the Great Demon Lord's goal was, but he also learned from the Great Demon Lord's words how the Great Calamity would break out in 30,000 years. At this time, Luo Fan already had an idea in his mind to increase his chances of surviving the Great Calamity. Therefore, he did not continue to feel sentimental. He turned around and took a step forward. In the blink of an eye, he had arrived at the top of Buzhou Mountain, above the liquid chaotic Yuan-Chi Sea. He lifted a finger and the infinite void palace rushed out of his sea of consciousness. It pressed down and sank into the depths of the liquid chaotic Yuan-Chi Sea. It began to violently swallow the endless chaotic Yuan-Chi, tempering itself and stabilizing the dimensional space inside. Luo Fan did not pay attention to the infinite void palace. He immediately sat down cross-legged. The earthly immortal's Tao fruit in his dantian vibrated slightly, constantly swallowing the chaotic Yuan-Chi around him to replenish the 10% of energy that was lost due to teleportation. After a while, he covered his left hand. From his sleeve, a strange material with a diameter of 100 feet rushed out and fell in front of him. This material had the appearance of a grayish crystal. It didn't appear to be very clear, but rather a little murky, as if there were many impurities within it. There were also traces of spatial fluctuations coming from it, as if there was some sort of extremely large space within it. This material was obtained by Luo Fan in the underground magma layer. It was a void crystal that could not be affected by the magma and could resist the corrosion of the magma. This crystal was a chaotic golden crystal. After endless tempering, it was compressed by an incomparably great power. In the end, it was compressed from its original diameter of hundreds of thousands of feet to its current diameter of 100 feet. Its internal characteristics had also changed in a strange way. It could even withstand the material of a dimensional space. He raised his hand and beckoned over the void crystal that was 100 feet in size. Lifting his hand, he felt that the weight of hundreds of thousands of kilograms was quite comfortable. Gently holding the crystal, Luo Fan quietly sorted out the thoughts in his mind. In the blink of an eye, countless complicated and abstruse words and patterns continuously collapsed and recombined in his mind. Gradually, they formed a profound and complicated formation. After the formation was formed, he raised his hand and pointed. The void crystal floated up from his hand as if it was weightless. It slowly rotated in front of him, and the ripples of space became more obvious. After the crystal spun for a while, a Tao flame rushed out from Luo Fan's hand and wrapped around the void crystal. The Tao fire was a mysterious flame that was born from the Tao fruit. It used chaotic vital energy as its fuel, and it contained boundless mysteries. Moreover, it had countless benefits for refining artifacts. This was the top of Buzhou Mountain. The chaotic vital energy was so dense that it had already turned into a liquid. The fuel for the Tao fire was so abundant that it was naturally extremely beneficial to the Tao fire. After this fire appeared, it instantly grew 10 times larger. In the blink of an eye, it had already enveloped the entire void crystal and was burning fiercely. It was as if a gray sun had appeared above the liquid chaotic primordial Chi Sea. The void crystal was a material that could remain intact even in the lava layer of the earth fire. One could imagine how tough it was. However, under the burning of the Tao fire, it could not even hold on for a single breath. When the Tao fire soared to the size of the sun, the surface of the void crystal showed signs of melting. After a few breaths, the void crystal that weighed hundreds of thousands of kilograms had completely melted into a liquid ball that was 100 feet in diameter. It kept twisting as it was wrapped in the Tao fire. At the same time, the superpower of the Tao fire in refining materials was unleashed to its limit. Wisps of smoke were emitted from the liquid ball at all times. When they were burned by the Tao fire, they disappeared without a trace. Following this change, the impurities in the liquid ball continued to decrease, and the volume of the material also rapidly shrank. After 3 days and 3 nights, the liquid ball had already shrunk to the size of a head. Its volume had shrunk by more than 100 times, and its nature had become extremely condensed and pure. It was almost impossible to remove any trace of impurities. Furthermore, the spatial ripples it emitted were extremely intense. It made people feel like it was not a mass of matter, but a space. Seeing that the material had been refined to such a degree, Luo Fan no longer hesitated. He raised his hand and patted it gently. Countless three-dimensional talisman shadows suddenly rushed out of his hand and instantly rushed into the Tao fire. They directly entered the small ball of gray liquid the size of a head. After these three-dimensional talismans rushed into the liquid, the gray liquid suddenly underwent a drastic change. Its volume expanded rapidly and twisted rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had already turned into a 3-foot-wide disc. On the entire surface of the disc, there were countless three-dimensional talismans rotating and recombining crazily, gradually forming an extremely mysterious large formation. The moment the large array was formed, the Tao fire that was like a gray sun that wrapped the material suddenly condensed. Then, it converged and entered the disc. As the Tao fire entered the disc, the mysterious large array seemed to be stimulated by something. The lines that were formed by countless three-dimensional talismans suddenly erupted with endless mysterious light. There seemed to be countless light shadows flashing in the mysterious light. These light shadows were extremely similar to the boundless sea of blood. The endless light shadows that came from the blood seemed to contain all the scenes in the world, whether it was the mountains and rivers, the boundless earth, the ferocious beasts pouncing on their prey, the long grass and the birds flying. Luo Fan's mind and intent guarded the large array that he had just sent out. He raised his hand and gently waved it. As he waved it, the image of the disc kept changing and changing. Gradually, it changed from its original appearance of being condensed from liquid to an extremely simple, yet all-encompassing copper mirror. The extremely strong spatial fluctuations that the material emitted also disappeared in an instant. When the bronze mirror was formed, Luo Fan covered it with his left hand, and a thumb-sized crystal appeared in his hand. It was emitting a mysterious fluctuation, and there were wisps of mist that were constantly changing its shape. This crystal was one of the 18 mysterious items that could upgrade a Dharma artifact to a Dharma treasure that he had obtained on Buzhou Mountain. After the crystal appeared, Luo Fan waved his right hand and drew mysterious and unpredictable trajectories. As the trajectories were created, the crystal was affected by a mysterious and invisible force. In the blink of an eye, it collapsed with a loud bang and turned into extremely fine stone powder. It suddenly pounced forward and instantly pounced into the copper mirror. As the stone powder pounced into the copper mirror, it was as if a kind of magical power had suddenly acted on it. A strange fluctuation gradually spread from the copper mirror, as if it was omniscient and omnipresent. The aura emitted by the copper mirror rapidly increased with the generation of this fluctuation. The formation on the copper mirror continuously flashed with all kinds of unpredictable light. These lights were extremely mysterious. They seemed to have endless power, and they also seemed to be evolving some kind of unspeakable mystery. The entire process lasted for a total of 9 days and 9 nights. At a certain moment after 9 days and 9 nights, the copper mirror suddenly turned into a child with a hazy appearance, as if it was covered by a thick layer of fog. It was impossible to see his appearance at all, but it seemed that anyone who saw him would think that they were looking at their own child. After the child appeared, he bowed towards Luo Fan and said, "Greetings, Master." Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "From now on, you will monitor the primordial world. If there is a space door that leads to the outer realm, inform me." "Yes, Master." The child bowed again. With a turn of his body, he had already transformed into a simple and unadorned copper mirror with a gray flame pattern on its back. The front of the copper mirror was like an extremely deep whirlpool. There seemed to be nothing in it, but it also seemed to contain a complete world. Then, the copper mirror swayed slightly and silently merged into the void, disappearing in front of Luo Fan. At the same time, Luo Fan felt that there was an extremely strange feeling in his mind. It seemed that as long as he was willing, he could communicate with the child at any time and control him at any time. Sensing this change, Luo Fan was very satisfied. The copper mirror was a Dharma treasure that he had refined. It was called the Heaven Observation Mirror. Its power was extremely powerful, and it could monitor the spatial changes of the entire primordial world. This seemed unbelievable, but in fact it did not contain much mystery. It was just that he had used the mystery of the illusion Tao that he had comprehended from the boundless sea of blood to create the world creation illusion formation. After fusing the void crystal essence into the formation, with the help of the formation and the profoundness of the materials, the bronze mirror became a Dharma artifact with an extremely incomplete illusory world inside. This illusory world relied on the primordial world to exist, and it had all kinds of unimaginable magical powers. Just like how the transformation between illusion and reality could allow Luo Fan to easily cross a distance of billions of kilometers, the copper mirror could also reflect the spatial changes of the primordial world to a certain extent. Because of Luo Fan's control, the illusory world was extremely incomplete, and it had already strengthened its power to the limit. After Luo Fan upgraded it to a Dharma treasure, the range expanded to the almost infinite extent of the entire primordial world. As a result, it had the incredible power to monitor the spatial changes of the entire primordial world. With the Heaven Observation Child, when the great Freedom Heavenly Devil Lord builds a door that leads to his Freedom Heaven in the future, I will be able to detect it immediately and deal with it, Luo Fan thought to himself.